Chapter 845. On the deserted main road of the Dalajan city, Arthas was riding on his loyal mount as usual, his beloved horse, Invincible, which had now become an undead warhorse. In Kuel Salis, he had an unpleasant experience. That ****starred, Darima was not content even in death. Instead of attacking him, he despicably attacked Invincible, using the high temperature of the sunwell to cut off one of its legs. This made him spend a lot of effort to refine the leg bone of the other undead warhorse with the power of darkness, and then connect it to Invincible. When Invincible was still alive, it died from a fatal injury caused by a broken leg. This made Arthas very unwilling to think back to that terrible moment many years ago. It was a very bad feeling. However, in the battle with the previous Elven King, the icy rage that was aroused by this matter was very helpful in defeating his opponent and successfully resurrecting Kel Thuzad. The arrival of Kel Thuzad made Arthas even more interested. Looking at him floating in front of him, from the Sunwell to Lordaeron City, and then to the Dalajan, the Lich seemed very quiet along the way. If this could be used to describe the Lich, a few days ago, it was Kel Thuzad who conveyed the order of the Lich King, asking the Scourge army to come to this ruins filled with Arthas memories. Although Arthas had some doubts about the order, he never raised any doubts. It was only yesterday that Kel Thuzad told Arthas about the true goal of the Scourge army, to summon one of the two commanders of the Burning Legion, Archimonde the Defiler, directly to the world of Azeroth. After hearing this news after an increasingly boring campaign, the former prince of Lordaeron was filled with curiosity and excitement. Because of the appearance of Duque, the Scourge army's sweeping momentum did not take shape. This was a sense of loss that even if they won, they would not be able to complete their mission. Suddenly, he thought that he could not completely suppress Duque now. If he had the legendary strongest warrior of the Burning Legion, Archimonde, behind him, would Duke Marcus still be able to stand proudly in front of him? Although they were both from Eredar, Archimonde and Jaden had completely different styles. Jaden preferred to use schemes. He did not hesitate to spend a large amount of time to achieve his and the Burning Legion's goals at the lowest cost. Archimonde, on the other hand, was the simplest form of violence. Even as a commander, what he loved the most was to personally go to the battlefield and inflict the most terrifying destruction on the enemy. He enjoyed the pleasure of destroying everything in front of him. This was also why the Demon King Sargeras, who was born as a Titan, and Jaden, who also had extraordinary combat power, rarely fought in the past 10,000 years. This made the other races more willing to believe that the Arkharans were the strongest in the Burning Legion. Thinking of this, the fallen prince smiled. "Take me there, Kel Thuzad." The Great Lich replied respectfully. Arthas was very satisfied with the Great Lich's attitude. Even though the Scourge army had at most 3 Breaking Dawn Great Liches, he still found Kel Thuzad the most pleasing to the eye. Antonidas lacked the self-awareness of being a Lich. Anastrian still hadn't given up on the arrogance of a former king. This fallen Elven king wasn't used to being a servant. In fact, Arthas sometimes wondered if being under the command of the Lich King Nazul was a kind of injustice. The Lich King's power was so strong, and Frostmourne was constantly subtly influencing Arthas' will. This made the fallen prince never think too much in this aspect. Suddenly, a thought came to Arthas' mind. He said mockingly, "You don't hold a grudge against me for killing you? Don't be silly." The Great Lich, who had become an undead, replied. "His Majesty the Lich King had already told me what the outcome of our meeting would be." Arthas looked very surprised. "His Majesty knew that I would kill you?" He frowned and glanced at the sword on his knees. It was sleeping quietly, not whispering, and the runes on it did not flash with power. Of course, there was a hint of superiority in Kel Thuzad's hollow voice. "Long before the Scourge army launched the Wrath of Heaven, he chose you as his warrior." Arthas was a little uncomfortable. It was the displeasure of being fooled. No one had ever asked or revealed his fate. If he had known earlier, would he have happily accepted his fall? He believed this without a doubt. Arthas never liked to be manipulated, but he understood that since he was destined to become a terrible weapon, he could only adapt. The fall was complete. Life was gone. Whether it was his father's, or his master's, if it wasn't for the massacre in the orphanage, maybe he would still be with Uther, his father, and even Jaina. Unfortunately, everything was just an unrealistic fantasy. Since the moment he pulled out, Frostmourne, his fate was already irreversible. He could only walk down the dark path step by step. The seemingly endless road soon came to an end. It was a huge altar that was rebuilt from the central square of the Dalajan. According to Thuzad, this blood altar was inlaid with skulls and countless corpses. It had the same function as the dark portal in the Cursed Land. Why don't we attack the dark portal directly? Arthas frowned. The Great Lich was silent for a moment, and finally replied, "The dark portal used to be a very good choice. But not anymore. The Marcus family spent 10 years to completely fortify the entire Swamp of Sorrow and the Watchtower area in the northern part of the Cursed Land. And all the ground near the stronghold has been treated with holy magic. We can't resurrect anyone who died there into Scourge soldiers." The Great Lich said a lot, but Arthas didn't listen to the end. In just a few moments, Arthas felt the malice of fate for the second time. His intuition seemed to be telling him that Duque had once again blocked in front of him, and it was the kind of block that foresaw everything in advance. Tisk. He spat harshly. It was a cruel ritual that was completed with the sacrifice of 10,000 living people. As the ritual progressed, in the final stage, Arthas could see with his own eyes that the fog rising next to the altar began to change from a stinky red to a strange green. The green fog continued to spin. Then, Arthas found that he could already see the shape of a giant. It was not an ordinary giant, but very, very big. Archimonde's size was beyond all his imagination. Chapter 846. For a person to look up at an existence that was 10 stories tall was already looking up. If this number was multiplied by 3, it would be close to 100 meters, 30 stories. Moreover, it was a living creature. Any ordinary person would only feel a terrifying sense of oppression, as if a mountain was falling on them. Archimonde was really huge. But in the next moment, this giant's body seemed to have been whipped by some mysterious force, and it began to shrink rapidly. What's going on? Arthas couldn't help but cry out. Damn it, it's very likely that the protection circle of the world of Azeroth is working. Thuzad immediately replied. When the Titans of the Pantheon left Azeroth, they left behind 5 dragon aspects and a circle that targeted Titans and other particularly powerful existences. This is why our Supreme Master, His Majesty Sargeras, has been unable to come here for the past 10,000 years. Why couldn't the Demon King directly enter this world, and instead possessed the Guardian Medivh 15 years ago? Why did the Great Lich secretly bring a bottle of polluted concentrated Sunwell water when he resurrected Thuzad? After the Great Lich's quick explanation, Arthas finally understood the general situation. Everything was caused by the magic circle left behind by the Creator Titan. If the demon commander of the Burning Legion wanted to enter, either the dragon aspects were almost all destroyed, and the power of the magic circle would naturally be weakened, or he could use powerful magic to drive an intergalactic portal, and at the same time, master the password to pass through the magic circle. And that password was the Book of Medivh. Thuzad spat fiercely, this is a little troublesome. It seems that the Book of Medivh we got isn't complete. Damn Antonidas, he actually left behind an incomplete password. That's another story. After Medivh resurrected, he once visited the Dalajan and warned Antonidas about the invasion of the Scourge Legion. Antonidas did not listen. Instead, he asked the Medivh for the Medivh's book. The reason was that since the Medivh was going to retire, there was no need for him to keep such an important thing. Medivh originally wanted to leave it for Duque, but unfortunately, Duque was trapped in the Karazhan Void at that time. After thinking about it, he agreed. Important things must be protected with enough strength. Later, however, the Dalajan also fell. Then Antonidas, who had turned into a great lich, offered the Medivh's book of his own accord. However, no one knew that this wasn't the original Medivh's book. It was incomplete. Now, he had directly screwed Arcarans over. Suddenly, the illusory giant showed an angry expression, and then let out a roar that shook the heavens and earth. What was that? You stupid little lich. You didn't even check the planet password before summoning me. From the void, a soul punishment came from the highest position. In an instant, the great Breaking Dawn lich was like a dead dog. First, he lay paralyzed on the ground, and then, as if struck by lightning, his body exploded continuously. Arcarans, I didn't mean to tease you. Seeing the powerful Fizad explode into countless bone fragments, and even his soul was instantly pulled out, wailing in pain in midair, Arthas felt a fear that came from the depths of her soul. Forget it. It's just a small trick. Even though they were separated by the endless void, Arcarans still used his powerful soul ability to search the great lich's soul completely. Then his anger subsided a little. The illusory giant opened its arms, as if it was tearing something apart. After a few continuous roars, the void in front of the altar seemed to be torn apart by a huge force. Finally, a huge black hole was torn open, and in the next second, an incomparably filthy aura filled the entire central square of the Daoist. If not for the fact that everyone in the square was an undying, they would have all been poisoned to death in an instant. The green mist continued to swirl. Then, Arthas found that he could finally see Arcaron's facial features clearly. From the blurred outline of his face, he looked like but not like the dreadlord he was familiar with at the same time. Arthas felt that his skin was greenish-gray, and although the green light shone on him, he still couldn't see it clearly. But there was no doubt that this demon commander's body was very strong. He had a huge barrel-like torso, thick and powerful arms, and legs like a goat. Arcaron's legs were bent backwards, and the ends were not feet, but a pair of cloven hooves. There was also a tail that was deliberately twitching, as if trying to show a calm and controlled demeanor. His arms, shoulders, and legs were covered in shiny golden armor, decorated with skulls and spikes. A pair of fleshy tentacles swayed on his chin, but the most special thing about his long face was not this, but a pair of glowing green eyes. The evil green light was brighter and more eye-catching than the mist that swirled around him. Arcaron's physical body finally entered this world, and his body was much larger than when he was at his smallest. Unfortunately, it was still only half of his original height, about 16 stories, or about 50 meters. Azeroth. 10,000 years. The humiliation that the Burning Legion had suffered for 10,000 years had been unbearable. But this humiliation is about to end. Because I am coming. Arcaron's voice was deep and loud, shaking the entire Daoist ruins. At first, Arthas felt that his bones were cracking, and it was some kind of auditory hallucination. Then he saw the pillars that kept shaking in the surrounding ruins, and the buildings that started to collapse. He finally realized that it was not an auditory hallucination. Even if he didn't want to admit it, he had to recognize that the demon in front of him, even if it was obviously weakened, was still far stronger than he could imagine. Arthas' neck unconsciously bent down, even if it was filled with intense shame and anger. Ignoring the fallen prince, Arcarans waved his hand again, and the great lich that had just been torn into pieces was perfectly pieced back together. Cultivate pays his respects to you. The great lich lowered his horned head. He was completely prostrated on the ground, not caring that his head had knocked into an unknown green pollutant. Great Arcarans, praise your mighty power. Praise your mighty power? You used your supreme power to forcefully open up the passage to this world. I hope that our next wholehearted service can slightly make up for the mistakes we have made. Arcarans waved his hand. Forget it. I can retain 50% of my power, which is already much better than the worst-case scenario I had imagined. This is enough. Chapter 847. Archimonde's words made Arthas and Cultivate secretly heave a sigh of relief. If it was kill Jaden, it would definitely be a very severe punishment. Archimonde glanced at the two little bugs in his eyes and did not pay much attention to them. After all, even if they were pawns, they were still Kill Jaden's pawns. Since they were pawns he borrowed from Kill Jaden, it would not be good to break them. Archimonde spat out a mouthful of turbid air from his 2 huge nostrils and said nonchalantly, "It doesn't matter. Even if it's only half of my strength, it's enough. In this world, I am invincible." Ha! His wild laughter once again caused the entire Dalagen to shake. Many elite cave demons were suddenly sucked into the ground and squeezed to death in the cracks caused by the rupture of the ground. Archimonde was venting his joy and madness. In the midst of his laughter, the evil green light began to spread out endlessly. The earth trembled. Beside the kneeling Arthas, invincible, anxiously turned around and raised its front hooves, as if trying to avoid touching the ground as much as possible. Arthas tilted his head slightly and looked at the city of mages from the corner of his eyes. Once upon a time, those towers were the most beautiful at this time of the day. They shone brilliantly in the darkening dusk, magnificent and magnificent. But just as he was immersed in his memories, a deep explosion suddenly sounded. The tallest and most beautiful tower in the city suddenly collapsed. That was Antonida's mage tower. Originally, as a great lich who joined the Scourge army, his mage tower was allowed to be preserved. But as Antonida's soul was destroyed in Quell, Delas, this mage tower became an ownerless object. It seemed that, like its master, it could not escape the fate of destruction. At this moment, its spire was slowly but inevitably tumbling down, and the whole tower seemed to be crushed by an invisible giant's hand. One had to know that this was not Archimonde's deliberate attack. This was just the shockwave caused by the ripples of his power. The rest of the city quickly collapsed and turned into dust. The sound of destruction rumbled in Arthas' ears, causing him to be shocked, but he didn't dare to raise his head. He had once commanded the Scourge army to single-handedly destroy Silver Moon City. However, he had fought the Dalagen twice, and the second time, he had only taken down the Dalagen with the help of Antonidas, the biggest spy. The scene in front of him, it was so easy, just a flick of a finger, destroying Kuel Salis was a hard-fought victory. If he hadn't destroyed Silver Moon City and revived Kel Thuzad, it would have been a complete failure, because in the end, he didn't even face the Alliance army led by Duque. But now, it seemed like Archimonde could easily destroy any magnificent human city, and he didn't even need to be there personally. The disparity in strength was simply too great. Following Archimonde's maniacal laughter, Arthas' most elite Scourge army was also finished. 500 Death Knights, 800 Liches, over 10,000 elite skeleton warriors, and some elite ghouls. There were countless cannon fodder. Only God knew how many would be left in the end. This scene made Arthas' heart ache a little, but he didn't dare to show it. "Alright, as long as you're happy, Master's colleague." Kill Jaden loved to settle scores after the fall, making people feel like they were better off dead than alive. Archimonde was the other extreme. He was completely single-minded, and as long as he ignored it on the spot, then it would be fine. Just as Archimonde was laughing wildly, there was a small interlude. Antonida's mage tower, which was supposed to be in a state of destruction, seemed to have triggered some kind of defense mechanism, and it actually attacked on its own. The bright arcane light attracted the attention of most of the strong people in the city almost immediately. Lightning. The flash. The lightning that split the sky was so sudden that many of the strong people only managed to react and subconsciously cast a defensive spell on themselves before the attack arrived. Who would have thought that the target of the Mage Tower's attack was not any of them, but the demon commander Archimonde? Archimonde's response caused Arthas and Kel Thuzad's eyes to widen. His response was no response at all. That was an all-out attack that gathered an unknown amount of Breaking Dawn Mage Tower's mana. Even Arthas didn't dare to take that terrifying amount of mana head-on. However, after the huge explosion, Archimonde tilted his head and didn't seem to be affected at all. Not to mention damage, there wasn't even a black mark on his abdominal muscles that had been hit. Although he knew that low-level mysterious power would definitely be dispelled by top-level mysterious power, the difference was so huge that it was simply unimaginable. Attacking the Burning Legion's commander? If it was Kill Jaden, perhaps there would be chaos, and he would want to chase after the possible culprit, or perhaps tear down the mage tower 3 more times. The arrogant Archimond didn't care at all. Instead, he turned his head. Tichondrius! With a call, the dreadlord Tichondrius figure suddenly appeared in a black fog. He knelt down on one knee and saluted Archimond. "Respected sir, are you calling me?" "Kill." Jaden said that the Scourge Legion will be handed over to you dreadlords. With that, Archimond didn't spare Arthes and Arthes another glance. He seemed to sense his target, and then began to take huge strides towards his target. If he didn't guess wrong, Archimond's target should be the World Tree on Mount Hyjal, Nordrassil. Only the World Tree. Only the Well of Eternity next to the World Tree could attract the attention of a super great demon like him. Important people had important people's goals. Small people had small people's thoughts. Thuzad's body seemed to tremble. Arthes understood why. For the Burning Legion, he spent more than 10 years in Azeroth, accumulated his strength in one fell swoop, and finally succeeded in summoning Archimond's Lich King. Nizul was ruthlessly abandoned the moment he succeeded. Perhaps in the eyes of the mortals of Azeroth, Nizul was an incomparably terrifying Lich King. However, in the eyes of the Burning Legion's commander, Nizul was perhaps just an unimportant chess piece. Arthes pondered over Archimond and Tichondrius, thoughtfully touching his chin. On his knee, Frostmourne coldly glowed. Almost at the same time, in Stratholme, Duque let out a scream. His face was ashen, and he couldn't control his emotions at all. F***CK. A Breaking Dawn attack. It actually didn't work? Then what's the point of me cultivating so hard? Chapter 848. The final blow of Antonida's Wizard Tower was naturally Duque's doing. If Duque could control the Wizard Tower once, he could control it a second time. Not to mention that Antonida's was no longer there. It seemed like Duque was a coward. No. Someone like Duque, who took the overall situation into consideration, was cautious, and seriously checked whether the original history was reliable. He was really the only one in the world. Chicken and eggs. Eggs hitting a rock. You won't die if you don't look for trouble. Adjectives like these all describe the same situation, overestimating one's capabilities. Duque never thought that this kind of thing would actually happen to him and the Alliance one day. Immune to magic. Invulnerable. This was simply the legendary invincible overlord body. The real version of Azeroth had gradually drifted away from the world that Duque was familiar with. Of course, this was also due to Duque's efforts. However, the system could not determine how much the world matched. Duque, who was already deeply rooted in this world, still had to muddle along. If he did not kill Archimond and let him kill the World Tree, once the Burning Legion succeeded, his days would be over. What to do? This was a very challenging thing. The original Archimond had looked for trouble by climbing the World Tree, and then was killed by the collective self-destruction of the Night Elf version of the Elf Pet. Elves were ancient souls living in the Kalimdor forest. Legend had it that they were actually the souls of the dead Night Elves. Elves and Night Elves lived in harmony and served the ancient trees. They could turn into various trees and grow into living buildings. For Duque, the most amazing thing about the elves was their self-destruction skill. Miraculously, ordinary people were immune to the self-destruction of the elves. Only professionals who had mastered magic and summoned creatures would be injured by the self-destruction. The self-destruction would consume the mage's magic power, which was commonly known as mana burning. As for summoned creatures, it would cause a huge amount of damage. According to history, Archimond was clearly defined as a summoned creature. Calling it a summoned creature was a bit inaccurate. To be more precise, it should be a soul or creature that did not belong to this world. However, the damage from the fairy's self-destruction was also limited. Before heavily injuring Archerons, the little sprite, who had no attack power and slow movement speed, would just be sending herself to her death. Only when Archimond was on his last breath would the little elf be able to send him on his last journey by self-detonating. Alright, the problem was back to square one. For example, Archimond was a huge, invulnerable super demon with sky-high physical defense. How could they beat him half to death? Duque didn't just have a toothache. His eyes hurt. My ears hurt. His heart ached. The pain in the ass. There wasn't a single part of his body that wasn't aching. A headache was a headache, but as a qualified commander, Duke still announced the important news of Archeron's arrival at the first possible moment. During the military conference, the high-ranking generals fell into a deathly silence. Last time, Duque sent the Demon King Sargeras into the bottomless abyss. The most important thing was that Sargeras had only descended with his soul in order to bypass Azeroth's protective spell formation. This time, it was Archimonde's true body that had descended. Although they did not know how strong he was, after seeing the images of the Dalajan ruins, everyone was still livid. Turalian stroked his increasingly fluffy beard. Do we have a chance of winning against such a monster? Mograine suddenly slammed the table. This is our world, our country, our homeland. Even if the chances of winning are 0, we must stand up against evil. Sidon advised, Alexandros, don't get too excited. No one can become a paladin if they don't have the heart to sacrifice themselves for justice. Our hearts are the same. Turalian is just wondering if there is a better way to get rid of this terrifying demon commander at the lowest cost. Abendis, who had just arrived yesterday, muttered, if we can get rid of it at a price, then that's fine. I'm most afraid that there is no price at all. No price was priceless. There was no way to get rid of it. Duque pondered for a long time, then finally made a decision. Ronan, I'll give you an important mission. I'll send you to the Kalimdor continent. I want you to lead an elite team and find a way to get in touch with the Night Elves as soon as possible. At the very least, warn them of the impending danger. Understood. Ronan nodded vigorously. His eyes were filled with undisguised excitement and passion. For Duque to give him such an important mission, this was undoubtedly an affirmation of him. He had followed that person for more than 10 years. He had grown up chasing after him. This was affirmation from Teacher Duque. Ronan felt the blood in his veins surging. I'll let Lilith accompany you. You'd better choose a reliable paladin from the Alliance. Abendis was stunned, then raised his hand. You can let my daughter Bridget go. Her team has just suffered heavy losses and needs to be reorganized. Sure. Duque had no objections. It was decided. What about us? Mograine asked. A demon commander. This is at least a demigod existence. This is far beyond what the Alliance can handle. I'll think of a way to contact the Dragon Slumber Shrine. But before that, I hope that everyone can spread out to avoid being completely wiped out. When Duke said this, every general's mouth was filled with bitterness. To resist the Calamity Army, the best way was to stick together. Only the strongest formation and the tightest defense could resist the Calamity Army's endless stream of undying. To avoid the Archerons, the safest way was to spread out. Only then could they avoid being wiped out all at once. This sounded like a self-defeating paradox. The alliance formed by all the kingdoms in the Eastern Kingdom actually had to beg the Archerons to go to the more important Well of Eternity and not come to their territories. How sad. Every general's heart was filled with grievances. Duque waved his hand. Alright, that's it for now. I'm going to find Lothar. Ashbring is not bad, but I still need to buy more insurance. Mograine was stunned for a moment, then nodded. His right hand unconsciously touched the huge hilt of Ashbringer. There was no first place in literature and no second place in martial arts. As a powerful warrior of the Alliance and a powerful warrior with a godly artifact, Mograine was too embarrassed to compete with Lothar, who was in poor health, because of his faction. However, Mograine still wanted to know, and he had thought about it countless times. Between his Ashbringer and Quell Zarum, which artifact was more powerful? It seemed like there was a chance now. Chapter 849. Duque left Stratholme and used the teleportation portal to arrive at the South Sea city-state. The teleportation portal was on a hill by the sea. Duque had arrived in a hurry and didn't even have time to inform them. Hence, when the mages guarding the teleportation portal saw Duque's face, They were stunned for a good 10 seconds. The Alliance's magic imprint was on the other side of the teleportation portal. It wasn't a predetermined teleportation, but the teleportation level was too high, so they couldn't help but tense up. The mages guarding the teleportation portal even called over the captain of the mages in charge of defense. However, when they saw the face on the other side of the teleportation portal, they still felt as if their brains had crashed. The legendary hero and commander of the Alliance, Duke Marcus, who had fought 3 consecutive battles at the Dark Portal, had teleported over just like that? There was more than one accident. Near the teleportation portal, a young man dressed like an ordinary knight apprentice suddenly revealed a surprised expression. Uncle Duque? This time, even Duque's mouth turned into an O shape. He cried out involuntarily, "William?" He was William Rin, who had been respectfully called King Hua by countless players before Duque's transmigration. When Duke had gone missing, William had only been a 12-year-old kid. 10 years was enough for William to grow into an incomparably strong young man. The good genes he inherited from his parents gave him a very masculine, square face. His chiseled facial features gave him a sense of fortitude. On top of that, he had been training day after day, year after year. Even through the armor, he could feel the surging power hidden under the armor and clothes. William almost sprinted over and gave Duque a big bear hug. "Uncle Duque, I'm so happy. I haven't seen you for 10 years, and you can actually recognize me at a glance." Nonsense. Would I say that I've seen your adult appearance every day for many years? Although there were already scars on your face back then, heroes couldn't be replicated. Although one could be trained in martial arts and impart all kinds of knowledge, one thing couldn't be repeated was experience. The current Varian was far from the Varian who had gone through so many trials and tribulations and matured. Duque could tell at a glance that he was strong, but that was only in terms of his body. Duque was very happy to see William, and he patted his back hard. "Brat, I'll recognize you even if I turn into ashes." "Uncle Duque, why are you here? We haven't received any news." "I was going to ask you the same thing. You're the king of Stormwind, and yet you've come to the front lines dressed like this. What is this?" William's face fell. It was only then that he realized that he had secretly come here on a boat without Lothar's knowledge. Little did he expect that before he even saw the Calamity Troop, he was too excited to see Duque. Duque smiled. He didn't need to pay special attention. He already saw a large group of guards in the surroundings. This hothead didn't realize that there were at least 20 Wang family guards and MI7 bandits around him. All right. If Lothar asks, tell him that I asked you to come to the front line for training." William's eyes lit up. "Uncle Duque is the best." "Yes, where's Andoin? I heard that he came back after recovering the Earthy Highlands," Duque asked. "Her Majesty Queen Menethil and Marchioness Barov came today. Uncle Andoin went to meet them anxiously." Duque's eyebrows twitched. "What kind of wind is this? Why are they here?" Suddenly, Duque thought of something. "William, you just arrived?" William shrank his neck. Actually, I begged Marchioness Barov to bring me here. I just came ashore." Duque frowned hard. "Come with me, we're going to look for Andoin. Something big has happened." "Something big?" William shivered at first, and then his eyes lit up. He was a rookie who had never really experienced war, but he was also a young man who had grown up under the halos of Andoin and Duque, the 2 legendary figures of the Alliance. He longed for the name of a hero. Almost as soon as he heard the word big, he felt the blood in his body boil. The group of people strode towards South Sea City, the central hub of the South Sea City-state. After more than 10 years of remote management, Illusia had turned South Sea into a commercial city with 50,000 residents and a floating population of more than 100,000. After the 3rd battle of the Dark Portal, a large number of refugees and civilians were sent away, and then a large number of reinforcements from the Iron Furnace Fort and Stormwind City came. This caused the South Sea City-state to have 300,000 soldiers and civilians on the line of defense. Looking at the city that had been militarized, but still retained a large number of traces of commerce, Duque suddenly felt a little dazed. Could Wuxia have turned this city into the new Alterac? Along the way, there were soldiers from Stormwind City everywhere. They had long heard of Duque's return, but this was the first time they saw Duque in person after Duque's return. The rookie recruits were shocked to see their commanding officers and their commanding officers' faces filled with surprise. They immediately put down what they were doing and saluted the group of people in the middle of the road. Then, almost subconsciously, they followed. That's Lord Duke Marcus? Yes. The Lord Marcus who saved millions of people in Stormwind City. Yes, Valentine's Day was also invented by him. With a child, Mary has no choice but to marry me. Most of the rookie soldiers who remained in the army more than 10 years later were already in the middle and upper echelons. The respect that the corps members had for Duque quickly infected the recruits who had grown up under Duque's name. Many of the recruits were orphans from back then. Thanks to the comprehensive welfare system that Duque had introduced, as well as the establishment of a large number of militarized orphanages, the tragic situation of a large number of young children dying by the roadside was avoided. When they found out that the person leading the group of people in the middle of the road was Duque, many of the recruits couldn't help but burst into tears. William looked at all this in shock. He secretly clenched his fists and told himself that he would become a great hero like Duque in the future. He would become the one respected by the people. As if sensing William's thoughts, Duque stopped in his tracks, turned around and smiled. William. Don't worry, you can do it too. You have the potential. I believe that you will be greater than your father, than Anduin, and even than me. William subconsciously stood at attention. He puffed out his chest and sucked in his stomach. Perhaps in his previous life, he was the almighty king who led the alliance. But in this life, he was still a young man who needed encouragement and guidance. After arriving at the majestic military fortress of the South Sea City, Duque was immediately led in by 3 knights after reporting. After pushing open the heavy door, Duque saw 3 familiar faces with pleasant surprise. Chapter 850. Although Duque really wanted to look at Kalia and Elugia's faces, Lothar was too eye-catching. The handsome Lothar of the past could not survive the passage of time. Lothar, who used to have long, elegant, wavy hair, was bald. The Mediterranean Sea above his head was extremely bright. As soon as he opened the door, Duque's eyes were dazzled by the light. Please forgive me for being immoral or having a low threshold for humor. Just as Anduin opened his arms and was about to hug him, Duque, the jerk, actually held his stomach and squatted down, laughing maniacally in front of everyone. Embarrassment was written all over the faces of everyone present. If someone else had done that, they would have been reprimanded long ago. Who asked him to be Duque? He was clearly young, and Duque had come out of retirement too early. Hence, everyone tacitly agreed that Duque was of the same generation as King Lang and Anduin. The guards at the side also had strange expressions on their faces. It was as if they wanted to laugh but did not dare to. Anduin's movements paused for a second, and then he immediately pounced on Lin Li at a faster speed. That was not a hug. That was the standard clinch move in wrestling. Everyone seemed to be able to hear the crisp sound of Duque's bones. Help! Kill me! Anduin, you bastard! Put me down! Duque was very tall, and his physique was comparable to that of an orc warrior. The difference in physique, coupled with the fact that Duque deliberately went easy on him, made the scene look as hilarious as it had been more than 10 years ago. The onlookers all had a smile on their faces. Speaking of which, only such an incomparably harmonious relationship could allow them to believe in each other even after losing contact for 10 years. Even after Duque's return, he had not returned to Stormwind City even once before today. Stormwind still steadfastly supported Duque and cooperated with Duque's actions. It was finally over. Duque seemed to have been put on his shoulder, but in fact he was dragged to the conference room like a dead dog. Damn it. You're still so strong. Go ahead and be happy. I'm already over 60 years old, and the only thing I can brag about is my strength. Anduin's face was full of sorrow. In this era of material scarcity, People who could live past 60 years old were considered to have lived a long life. Duque shrugged. It's better than lying on a sickbed and waiting for death. Anduin glanced at William, who had shrunk his head back, and shifted his focus back to Duque. Why do you still look like you were 18 or 19 years old? Duque stuck out his tongue. Do I have to tell them that the Red Dragon Queen has granted me immortality now? Anduin did not mind. Well, when I first met you, people often said that I looked like a young man in his 20s. Now, it's your younger generation's world. After saying that, he deliberately glanced at Kalia and Alucia, who had not taken their eyes off Duque ever since he entered the room. Anduin secretly sighed in his heart. Ordinary people could not even find a noble lady to marry, but Duque had it easy. When he heard that Duque had officially rejected Jaina, Anduin was not surprised at all. This was because the news that Duque had hooked up with Queen Kalia and the soon-to-be Queen, Sylvanas, had already spread like wildfire. Coupled with the Marquis of the Stormwind Kingdom, who actually controlled the entire South Sea city-state, Lady Alucia Barov, who also had hopes of establishing a new country, it was not an exaggeration to say that Duke had provoked the three queens at the same time. In times of peace, this might have been a war. Fortunately, the Calamity Army was invading, and no one thought about it in that direction. Anduin rolled his eyes. At most, if that bastard Duque wanted to escape from the marriage, Stormwind would protect him. However, business was more important now. Earlier today, there was a violent tremor in the Dalajan. The palace mages of Stormwind deduced that there might be a powerful existence descending. You should be here for this matter, right? The commander of the Burning Legion, Archimond. He has just descended in the Dalajan and is now heading west. He is expected to enter the Endless Sea from the South Flow coast or near the border of Gilnis. His target is most likely the Well of Eternity at Mount Hyjal in the Kalandor continent. With that, Duque played the footage he had recorded from Antonida's Mage Tower. He even emphasized that the attacks of Breaking Dawn mages were ineffective against Archimond. The entire audience gasped in astonishment. A combat power that could easily destroy a city single-handedly. Could this guy really be defeated? In the face of a super demon like Archimond, the power of mortals and the combat power of mortals were 1,000,000 times more laughable than ants. Should they be glad that Archimond did not directly cause trouble for the Alliance after descending? Or was this just the final countdown before the real apocalypse? Under the conference table, Alucia, who was sitting on Duque's left as Duque's vassal, secretly extended her small hand towards Duque. Duque did not refuse, and also used his left hand to secretly grasp Alucia's soft and slender hand. Women were sensitive, and in times like this, they especially needed comfort. Duque immediately held her hand, which made Alucia feel at ease and relieved. She could not help but shout in her heart. Duque did not forget me. Duque did not forget me. Duque did not forget me. Kalia, who was sitting opposite, seemed to be equally sensitive. She noticed the change in Alucia's expression, and from the movements of their shoulders, she could faintly feel the small movements under the table. However, she was sitting here as a queen, so she could only lightly purse her lips and pretend that she did not feel anything. Back to the topic at hand. William was truly fearless. He raised his hand and asked, "Is there nothing that we humans can do?" Duque said in a deep voice, "This is the reason why I am here. We already have an Ashbringer. But I still want to ask, how is Quell, Zarum? Also, if you want to fight against Archimond, your body might not be able to support you." Wait a moment. Anduin walked out of the conference room. Not long after, he carried a big sword that was still emitting a soft golden light even though it was sheathed in a huge scabbard. On the conference table, under William's excited gaze, Anduin pulled out Quell, Zarum. Golden light. Dazzling. That holy aura seemed to be substantial, and it surged towards them like layers of waves. Looking at it, it was easy to recall Anduin's heroic bearing 13 years ago, when he used this sword to cut through all the obstacles on the battlefield and annihilated the orcs. However, he did not know if it was an illusion. He just felt that this sword seemed to be a little narrow. Anduin, The sword has indeed been recast, but after it broke back then, there was a long fragment that could not be put back together no matter what. After saying that, Anduin actually took out a long one-handed sword that was also emitting a holy radiance. Chapter 851. The system genie scanned it, and the general situation appeared. This was the translated version of the information that Duque was familiar with. Unknown holy sword bound after pickup unique one-handed sword 90-155 damage, speed 2. 0 attribute, holy level, artifact, low level, requirement, Breaking Dawn Mage, non-evil alignment. It is estimated that the attributes of the equipped user will be increased as follows. Plus 32 stamina plus 42 agility. Equip increases the critical hit rate of your physical attacks by 36. Equip increases the critical hit rate by 50. Equip increases the attack strength by 108. Equip possibility of hitting, shoots a holy arrow at the target, dealing 308 to 412 points of holy damage and an additional 100 points of holy damage within 10 seconds. Equip deals 10 points of holy damage to enemies who attack you with melee weapons. Looking at this long and sharp sword, almost like a piercing sword, the incomparably dazzling holy sword, Duke's testicles were faintly aching. Fate seemed to be playing a huge joke on him. A divine weapon that had never appeared in the original history was right in front of him. Its gorgeous attributes and special effects were definitely superior to all epic weapons in this era. It might even be superior to other divine weapons by several streets. 99% of its attributes were flawless. If it was taken out, most melee professionals in the world would go crazy for it. It was a pain in the ass because the equipment requirement was for a Breaking Dawn Mage. What the hell is this? A melee weapon for Breaking Dawn mages? It was true that mages could use one-handed swords. Before transmigrating, Duque had teased his mage friends in the game. Damn it, if you can't fight, can't you just rush up and kill the boss with your staff? However, this holy sword, which was clearly meant for thieves who use swords, was actually limited to Breaking Dawn mages. Wasn't this asking Duque to stab Archimonde with the sword? Such a small sword for Archimonde to use as a toothpick? What kind of divine weapon is this? Duque, who was used to safely hiding behind and casting magic, was shocked when he found out that this meant he had to fight at close range. Anduin also knew how unreliable this sword was. He could only shrug and say helplessly, "I don't know what happened either. After the sword broke, I went to find Magni to reforge it." In the end, he still insisted that this was the guidance of fate. The guidance of fate? Fate my ass. If I didn't change your fate, you, Noxus, would have been dead 13 years ago. Lothar continued, "If it was someone else, I would think that Magni was crazy. But if it's you, I think this might be a special opportunity. Come to think of it, your talent in close combat isn't bad. After all, you stabbed Sargeras and beat up Deathwing." Duque couldn't hear what Lothar said after that, because he was already in a mess in the wind. Duque wasn't afraid of death because he could resurrect. Duque had always tried his best to stay as far away from those who played with dark magic and plundered souls. One had to know that even though Archimonde looked like a maniac in melee combat, he was actually more skilled at magic than most mages. He could still remember Archimonde's Finger of Death. This unreasonable dark magic was definitely powerful enough to destroy the heavens, the earth, and the air. If he was hit by it, Duque's soul would fall in minutes. Even the angel sister, who could only be seen after death, couldn't save Duque. This time, if he died, he would die. In the past, Duque had the fearless image of a mage who wrote novels and a warrior. But aren't you a legendary hero? Aren't you the dragon slayer Duque? You even dared to fight Sargeras. Why don't you dare to fight Sargeras' underling? When Duque rose higher and higher with all kinds of achievements, people would unknowingly have higher expectations of him. It was like a ruffian who became a hero, and people would praise him loudly. On the other hand, even if a hero slaughtered one evil dragon after another and saved countless people, people would only think of him when the next evil dragon appeared. For a moment, Duque almost wanted to abandon this burden. He had never been a true warrior, Even after transmigrating for so long and doing so many earth-shattering things, he was still an ordinary university student. He could be resurrected after losing his moral integrity, and he could sacrifice his courage at almost no cost. No one knew that because he was afraid of his soul being captured, Duque had been avoiding Ingang and other demon warlocks who were far more powerful than him. For example, he had never faced the demigod warlock ghoul, Dan, even once. Moreover, this time, he was no longer facing an enemy of similar strength, but a demon commander who was far beyond his imagination. It wasn't just him. Even Elugia, who was secretly holding his hand, grabbed his hand instead. She was clearly saying, "Don't go, that's the demon commander. Only a demigod should deal with him." However, Duque still held out his hand. It wasn't the left hand that Elugia was pressing down on. It was the right hand. He used his right hand to grasp the hilt of the unknown longsword. There was a bitter smile on his face. "I came for insurance. I just didn't expect this insurance to be myself." Anduin took a deep breath. "You're hesitating." Unexpectedly, Duque didn't deny it. "I thought you were a fearless and gutsy non-human monster." Duque was silent. However, Anduin walked over and patted Duke's shoulder under William's expectant and slightly disappointed gaze. He didn't face Duke, but spoke to William instead. "Don't worry, Anduin." "William, did you see that? A true hero isn't a fearless madman. Even the great hero in your eyes, Duke Marcus, would still be afraid, worried, and hesitant. This is normal, because only those who act like that are real people." Not only William, but even Duke's face was filled with astonishment. Anduin continued, "This is a crisis of the world. Who wouldn't be afraid when facing such an opponent? However, among 10,000 people, there would always be one or two who would stand up for various reasons. Maybe it's for honor, or maybe it's because of responsibility, or some other messy reasons. But these are not important. As long as one makes the crucial choice at that crucial moment, regardless of whether he succeeds or not, he is already a hero at that moment." Duque was stunned. William took a deep breath. "Uncle Anduin, were you afraid when you went to Karazhan back then?" "Of course. I was afraid too, but I had to go because I had your father and you behind me, the kingdom, and millions of Stormwind people. And Medivh was one of my few childhood friends. So I had to go. It's not an exaggeration to say that I became a hero because of my responsibility." Chapter 852. At the age of 22, Varian was at his most hot-blooded. He longed to make a name for himself, and to one day become a hero on par with Uncle Anduin, whom he admired the most. It wasn't that he didn't like Duque, but that Duque was a mage after all, and they weren't on the same path. Anduin's words were a good wake-up call for Varian. He humbly lowered his head and bowed to Anduin. At this moment, Kalia, who had been silent all this while, spoke. Even though she had matured a lot, she still had the unique voice of a young girl. "Duque, is there anything else that Rotterdam can do for the Alliance?" Duque tapped the table lightly with his left index finger. If the unrecognizable course of history hadn't changed, then in less than 3 months, once Archimonde knelt down, the power that the Burning Legion transmitted to Azeroth would immediately weaken. By then, Lich King Nazul would lose half of his strength. Logically speaking, waiting until then to counterattack was the most ideal. But doing so was a little too passive. First of all, this was on the premise that Archimonde had to kneel. If Archimonde was too powerful in this life, and really destroyed Mount Hyjal, settled the Well of Eternity, and destroyed the World Tree, that would really be the end of everyone. Secondly, the Alliance had preserved more vitality than in history. At least 2/3 of Rotterdam's elite army was preserved, which gave the Alliance more confidence. There would no longer be the Scarlet Crusade, which was cursed like a dog, and the slightly bitter Silver Dawn, which was praised by tens of thousands of people. Moreover, Kalia had become the queen. It would be too much of a waste if she was simply placed in the palace as a mascot. Just as Duque was thinking about it, he suddenly received a new message. It was a magical image sent by a mage apprentice who had sacrificed himself. In the image, Archimonde's huge body swept across the fragile Rotterdam continent all the way to the west. In the lands invaded by the Calamity Army, only all living things died, and everything withered. At least the land was still the land, and the forest was still the forest. The places that Archimonde passed through were all easily burned by the flames that flowed out of his body. The ground was sinking, and everything that could be burned was turned into ashes. Perhaps this was why they were called the Burning Legion and not the Devil Legion. In his heart, Duque cursed fiercely, "Damn it, since this guy can teleport here, why can't he teleport directly to Kalimdor?" Although he was cursing, Duque still asked the officer who had sent the message in detail. The news he got was that Archimonde had already gone to the vicinity of Orson Farm in the Silver Pine Forest in the west of the Lordaeron continent. It is estimated that the gigantic demon will arrive at the South Stream coast by late tomorrow, the messenger reported. Duque pondered for a moment and gave his first order. "Tell Dalin to clear the sea route. Don't come into contact with the Arcarans." Turning his head, Duque looked at Queen Kalia, who looked hopeful and eager for a quest. "Please inform Mograine. Have Abendis and Turalian push the front lines back to the Soderil River, then have Dathrahan and Mograine personally lead the attack on Caer Darrow." Caer Darren? Ilucia trembled. She could never forget that place. After all, she had lived in Caer Darren for her entire childhood. Unfortunately, Ilucia, that place has become the biggest base for the Church of the Damned. The Scourge Army calls it Scalomance. The Dark Dean, Jaden, has been continuously training dark acolytes and necromancers there. Destroying that place is equivalent to cutting off an important source of manpower for the Scourge Army. Anduin snapped his fingers. He seemed a little happy. Not a bad idea. Also, that place is near the front lines. But don't they have 2 Breaking Dawn Great Liches? Shouldn't we? Duque shook his head. You don't know those 2 Great Liches well enough. A Nastrian isn't the kind of guy who is willing to follow orders and be a dog. Kel, Thuzad doesn't like to fight head-on. Before all his subordinates die, he won't fight. But just in case, I can ask Krasis to help attack Caer Darren. If anything happens, he can still hold on until I teleport over. Kalia smiled. Then I have no problem. What about us? William was a little excited. Call Magni. We'll go to the Dalajan and have an armed patrol. William immediately became dispirited. He wasn't lacking in intelligence. He immediately understood what this meant. Archimonde had roared in the Dalajan and turned the Dalajan into ruins. It was conceivable that Arthas would evacuate the Dalajan. Now that the Scourge Army was powerful, attacking Rotterdam would provoke Arthas to retaliate fiercely. Any commander with a clear mind would know that it was impossible to take down the Scourge Army in one go. The best way was to plan slowly. Hence, attacking the Dalajan was more of a political gesture. Just like a few days ago, Lothar had recovered the Arthi Highlands and Rapidwater Castle, which had almost no organized undead army. On the surface, it was said that they had recovered a lot of territory, but in reality, it was just a piece of empty land. Except for the most determined people in Rapidwater Castle, no one would be willing to continue to stay there. In fact, in the past week, more than 100,000 Gilnis and Storm Guardians had responded to Jaina's call and boarded the ship or were preparing to board the ship to go to the paradise in their hearts, Theramore, which was on the other side of the endless ocean. After a long discussion, they finally decided on the missions of each legion. After the meeting, Lothar found Duque in private and told him a piece of news that wasn't surprising to Duque. If we have to go to battle against Archimonde this time, I won't be able to go. I plan to give Quell the Zerm to Durain. Ando in your body, Lothar smiled bitterly. I got injured when I was young. I only realized that it was terrible after I was 60 years old. My bones and muscles hurt all the time. Lothar took off his coat and pointed at the various scars on his body. Duque noticed that several of the scars were left from the battle with Orgrim. Thinking about how Lothar had once again led the army to battle despite his illness, Duque couldn't help but feel a lump in his throat. Then, as a warrior, dying on the battlefield is the best ending. However, if I want to weaken the hope of the Alliance and all the intelligent species in the world to win, then I'd rather give up my divine sword and let the stronger younger generation gamble on the future of humanity. I've already decided on this matter, don't try to persuade me. You should know Turayan well. He's a good guy. Indeed. I'll leave it to you this time. I hope you can have good news. If you fail, don't worry, I'll be there. Even if I have to carry a broken sword, I'll go and fight Archimonde. Lothar was clearly saying those words in a relaxed manner, but Duque could deeply feel that Lothar was full of helplessness and sensed that he was past his prime. Duque's chest tightened. Not only did he feel respect for Lothar, but he also felt extremely regretful. Veterans don't die, they just wither. Chapter 853. There was hesitation and the thought of retreating. Compared to a true hero like Lothar, Duque felt ashamed. His title as a legendary hero was more like a blasphemy to the word hero. It had nothing to do with past achievements, but purely the difference in ideology. Duque summoned his courage and said, "Yes, Anduin, actually, you might also know that the longevity of the High Elves and their original ancestors, the Night Elves, actually comes from the blessings of the dragons. To be precise, it comes from the blessings of Nosdorm." Lothar narrowed his eyes, seemingly having already guessed what Duque was going to say. Before Duque could say it, he waved his hand gently to stop Duque. Perhaps living beings will instinctively pursue the so-called longevity, immortality, and even eternal life. However, I don't think that too long of a time is a good thing for a living being. Look at the High Elves. Even if they don't have an infinite lifespan, what have they done in the past thousands of years? They have fallen and corrupted because of emptiness, and imprisoned the thoughts of themselves and their compatriots because of their lack of progress. In the past 7,000 years, has the entire Kuel Salis kingdom ever improved at all? Lothar's words made sense, and Duque was speechless. It is precisely because of the shortness of human life that we cherish it. Humans will seize the most glorious years of their lives to invent, create, and do all kinds of valuable things. Look, when I was young, the entire world only knew about swords and magic. Lothar then pointed his finger at Duque's eyebrows. However, the hot weapons and steam civilization that you promoted have overturned the lives of the people of Stormwind in the past 13 years. If it weren't for the existence of transcendent professionals, and if it weren't for the fact that cannons couldn't destroy the undying and demons, there would be no need for longswords and holy light to exist at all. Think about it, isn't this a miracle created by humans? Duque's breathing quickened all of a sudden. He waited, eager to hear Lothar's last words. Indeed, Anduin Lothar, the name with a sacred meaning, and the greatest words left by the greatest man of this era, did not disappoint Duque. That is to say, life is great because it's short, life is glorious because it's limited. Duque was shocked to the point of being unable to control himself, as if a bucket of cold water had been poured over his head. Duque suddenly understood why Lothar would choose not to marry and would rather let the noble and great Arthi bloodline end in his generation. Noxus believed that there was no need for Thoradin the Great's bloodline to continue existing after a more inclusive and greater alliance. Suddenly he felt like crying. But he couldn't cry. Lothar left, leaving Duque alone in the wind, gazing into the distance. As the night deepened, Ilucia came to Duque's side. "It's getting late. Get some rest." If the soldiers below see you in such a melancholic state, they will start to doubt their future. Yes. In the past 10 years, in order to avoid agitating the Rotterdam kingdom, the Bara family had never sent any of their members to take up important positions in South Sea Castle. However, as the former lord of South Sea Town, the Bara family's influence was everywhere, and they were the de facto masters of South Sea City-State. Hence, the Bara family owned an independent villa on the hill to the west of South Sea Castle. Following Ilucia to the so-called resting place, Duque was stunned to discover that the style of the villa was completely modeled after the villa on the side of the Wind Lake that he often stayed in. It was not just the exterior, but even the things inside were arranged exactly the same, except for those that were too precious to be replicated. The master bedroom was arranged according to Duque's bedroom in Karazhan. Clearly, that was not something that could be done overnight. More importantly, many of the things in the villa were obviously Windrunner style, which was left behind by the two female owners of the Wind Lake Villa. In fact, she had even discovered and imitated many small details. If Alicia was a jealous or narrow-minded woman, she would never do such a thing. What was effort? That was effort. Duque suddenly sighed. Alicia was too good to him. In the 10 years that he had been missing, Alicia had supported the entire Marcus family without complaint or regret, ensuring that his policies and plans could continue to be implemented, and even providing for all the expenses that his so-called fiancée, Gianna, had. When he had just returned, when his magic circuit was in a mess, she did not hesitate to split her soul and offer up her magic circuit to help him through the difficult times. When he rushed to the Daoist to besiege Arthas for the first time, Alicia endured the pain in her soul and rushed back to Stormwind City to organize the logistics of the army. This young lady of the Barra family, who had almost been completely ruined, had silently shouldered so much with her feminine body and weak shoulders. However, she had never been jealous of Aurelia and Sasha. She put herself in a low position and did all this silently. Alicia? Alicia, who had been tugging at the hem of her skirt nervously, not knowing if Duque liked her, was stunned for a moment before coming back to her senses. While I'm back, I'll first fix your magic circuit. No, your battle is imminent. You need more? Obviously, Alicia had misunderstood. Duque did not say anything, but only deeply pressed his lips on hers. The woman's uneasy heart suddenly calmed down. Duque smiled. Don't you think that if you get your magic circuit back, it will be more convenient for you to open the portal to find me? Alicia's face instantly turned red. From her cheeks to her neck, to her collarbone, to her half-exposed peaks, she was all bright red. Actually, I didn't mean to drag you down today, but when I think that I haven't really had you, and that I might lose you soon, I suddenly feel very scared. Duque breathed into Alicia's sensitive ear. Today, in addition to fixing your magic circuit, I will also help teach you alchemy. Alchemy? When did Duque learn this thing? Or did Duque learn it in the past 10 years in Karazhan? Duque added in a low voice, it's the most mysterious human alchemy in the world. What? The human body was very mysterious. It consisted of 45% to 75% water, about 8% blood, 35% to 40% bones, and a certain amount of protein, fat, and muscle. The specific method was to first purify the parent body, usually just washing it clean, and then draw a magic circle with your finger. Usually, you would focus on the important parts, and wait for the parent body to warm up. The last step was the most important step, pulling out the long sword needed to summon life, stabbing it into the center of the magic circle, repeatedly stabbing straight, stabbing left and right, and stabbing back until the blade burst with the light of life. There was a chance to complete human alchemy in 10 months. Chapter 854. The moonlight was bright, and the beauty was as beautiful as water. As if afraid that her beloved pillow would run away, Alicia hugged Duque tightly and refused to let go. The beauty was exhausted. Duque had been holding back for too long and had gone overboard on a whim, tormenting her greatly. However, Alicia was like a moth flying into a flame, fearless of her own safety, and welcomed him with all her might. When Duque came back to his senses, he realized that this was a combo that Aurelia and Reisa together might not be able to withstand. Would there be any deaths? Would it kill someone? The above two sentences should be understood from two different perspectives. Chinese is a wonderful language. Sensing that Duque moved, Alicia trembled like a frightened rabbit. She struggled to open her tired eyes and said almost subconsciously, "Duque, don't go." Duque was speechless. He gently stroked Alicia's head and said softly, "I won't go, I won't go." Only then did Alicia wake up. She raised her head, and there were still faint traces of tears in the corner of her eyes. Duque suddenly felt heartache and wiped away her tears with the softest of movements. "I'm sorry I hurt you." The black-haired beauty made a mellow nasal sound, and then smiled softly. This pain is really nothing compared to the 13 years of waiting and mental torture. It's a pity that I can't give you my most beautiful 10 years. Women were like flowers, and Alicia's most dazzling and blooming age had just passed. Using her finger to gently draw meaningless symbols on Duque's trained abs, Alicia said faintly, "I'm not a jealous woman. As long as you can occasionally come and pamper me, I'm willing to die." So, where else could he find such a good woman? For a moment, Duque felt that starting a harem was a very immoral act. But after being together for so long, it would be a sin to leave anyone behind. But he would get used to it after a while. However, Duque decided to give Alicia a gift. "Close your eyes." She had doubts, but she did not hesitate. She knelt there and propped herself up without any concealment, revealing her beauty. She then gently raised her head and closed her eyes, quietly waiting for Duque to make his move. She trusted Duque unreservedly. Even if Duque gave her a sharp knife to kill herself in the next moment, she was willing to accept it. However, what she got was a surge of heat that she had never experienced before. It was like a clear spring in the mountains in summer. At the same time, it was like the boundless growth of cheerful vitality in spring. She could clearly feel that the white hair that she had grown due to working overtime and staying up late had fallen off by itself. The dry and split ends of her hair had also disappeared without a trace. There was also her skin. Although she had always taken good care of it, how could the skin of a 28-year-old mature woman be comparable to that of an 18-year-old girl? But at this moment, she felt as if an endless source of life was nourishing every corner of her body. Every inch and every cell in his body was singing in joy. "Ah!" Alicia finally cried out involuntarily. She looked at her delicate palm in disbelief. Then, almost recklessly, she turned around and rushed to the only full-length mirror in the room. The next moment, she suddenly understood what Duque's gift was. It was something that almost all human women in the world secretly yearned for and had always been envious of the High Elves: eternal youth. If it was given to her by someone else, she would most likely think that it was some kind of magic or high-level scam. But the person who gave her the gift was Duque. The Duque who saved the Red Dragon Queen, Alexstrasza, was also her lover. Duque gently hugged Alicia and whispered intimately, "Isn't it just 10 years? If you want 100 years, 1,000 years, I can give it to you." Alicia was so excited that her tears were like a broken dam. She turned around and kissed Duque frantically. The second round of human alchemy had begun. The next morning, there was another military conference. William was dumbfounded to see that the two ladies who had participated in the military conference the day before had completely different reactions. Alicia was in high spirits. What was more exaggerated was that she seemed to be 10 years younger. In the past, William had felt that Alicia was a very obvious older sister. Why did he feel that she was the same age as his queen now? On the other hand, Queen Kalia, Her Majesty seemed to have not slept well the whole night. Even though she covered it with rouge and makeup, one could still see the obvious eye bags and dark circles under her eyes. Just as William was about to ask the queen if she had not slept well the night before, the old Andoin kicked him harshly under the table. On the contrary, the Bronzebeard brothers, who had just arrived with the new dwarf army today, looked confused. Then, Duque suddenly felt like strangling Magni's big mouth, because the dwarf king had made it clear from the start. "Duque, what the hell are you doing now? How many queens have you offended? Let me tell you, if you cause a civil war in the alliance because of this, I won't save you." His words made Kalia so embarrassed that she wanted to find a hole to hide in. She and Duque were innocent. Theoretically, Duque was embarrassed. He decided to be an ostrich. "I don't know anything. I really don't *king know anything. I don't care if you believe it or not, I believe it myself." Yes, the plan worked. In the following week, the Alliance's two armies advanced at the same time. It was not considered a joint attack, but it was actually challenging the Calamity Army's bottom line. Without any obstacles, the Alliance's southern army recovered the Dalajan ruins. Along the way, the number of wandering undead they encountered was only in the 4 digits, which had nothing to do with the Calamity Troop. William went up excitedly and cleaned them up in a few moments. The boring victory made William lose interest. Uncle Duque, will the Scholomance Academy resist more fiercely? If I had known, I would have gone there to take a look. But there won't be any fierce resistance there, Lothar said with certainty. But William continued to ask. Because the one in control of the Calamity Army is no longer the Lich King Nazul. If I'm not wrong, when Archimonde descends, the control of the Calamity Army will fall into the hands of the Dreadlord tribe. Of course, they would want more of Nazul's loyal followers to be destroyed. The Scholomance Academy nurtured people from the Cursed Church, and the founder of the Cursed Church, Kel Thuzad, was a loyal follower of Nazul and Arthas. The cunning Dreadlord was, of course, happy to see the Scholomance Academy kneel down. On the other side, the liches that had been transformed from high elves were also happy to see this scene. Would Arthas and Kel Thuzad, these 2 lone commanders, rush to save the Scholomance Academy? Chapter 855. Caer Daren, the former base of the Bara family, was on the island in the middle of the lake. At this moment, the huge city gate seemed to be under unimaginable pressure, and it was creaking. Every nail, every huge wooden plank, and every piece of reinforced steel frame on the city gate that was wrapped in a thick layer of fine steel skin was trembling, as if it would fall apart at any moment. It was the Dark Dean of Scholomance, Gandling. His dark magic was exploding uncontrollably under the stimulation of the powerful holy light outside the door. He looked at the dark apprentices behind him with pity, and he tried to suppress the unstable structure of the space due to the powerful mysterious power. He reminded them with difficulty, "Run for your lives. Those who were killed by Ashbringer won't even have the chance to revive." Within a radius of several kilometers, there were Griffin Knights in the sky, warships specially towed by steam tractors on the surface of the water, and Naga and Murloc troops that had been specially summoned to the bottom of the water. The one in charge was even the Murloc Prophet Maugr, who had advanced to the Radiant Moon rank. The surrounding space was still completely sealed by the Dalajan mages led by Krasis with a magic array. Regardless of whether an Astrian would come or not, even if he did, no one would be able to save them if Duke entered the battlefield at any time. Unless the entire Scourge army came to rescue them. But was it possible? Not when the Dreadlord family controlled almost all the high-level undead. With the last tone of Gadon's words, there was finally an overwhelming sound of metal tearing and giant wood twisting and shattering at the huge city gate. The gate, which was more than 10 meters tall, collapsed. In the swirling dust, 2 burly figures emitting golden light appeared in front of the dark acolytes and necromancers, ignoring the interference of the dust. The fallen ones. Mograine swung Ashbringer, which was as large as a door, and hundreds of evil souls within 100 meters let out shrill screams before they could even get close. Then, under the blazing platinum light, they were turned into ashes. Retreat? Where could they retreat to? Under normal circumstances, they would retreat to the depths of Scholomance and use traps and mechanisms to deal the most damage to the Alliance. Don't forget, history is very different. The Bara family, which had joined Scholomance in the past, had lost 2 unfilial sons, but the old duke was still living well in Elwyn Forest. Caer Daren was a territory that the Bara family had operated for centuries. What Gadon knew, the Bara family knew. What Gadon didn't know, the Bara family knew. It was a tunnel of uncanny workmanship that connected the bottom of the lake to the island in the middle of the lake. Furthermore, it had been enhanced by concealment magic, preventing detection from those below the Breaking Dawn realm. It had not been opened for over 30 years. A super holy bomb made by the best dwarves and gnome craftsmen was secretly transported to the lowest level of Scholomance. When the lake water mixed with holy light shot out from the ventilation holes of every room in the academy, the outcome of this battle was already decided. Mograine slashed Ashbringer in the air, and the golden sword light that seemed to be able to extend endlessly hit Dean Gadon's black magic shield like lightning, exploding into sparks all over the sky. This was the result of Gadon using lightning and dodging most of the power of Ashbringer. If he had been hit directly, he would probably have been killed instantly. The surrounding space became more and more viscous, and even a powerhouse of Gadon's level could only flash to a mere 20 meters away. Usually, a flash was at least 100 or 200 meters away. Gadon groaned in pain and directly abandoned the magic shield on his body that had been corroded by the holy light. He tumbled down from the air and rolled a few times on the ground under the effect of the momentum before he stabilized himself. However, just as he summoned a new void demon and tried to sacrifice this demon to become his magic shield again, another ball of holy light brushed past his fingertips and hit his summoned demon. That was Sidon Dathrahan's Hammer of Wrath. The hammer made of golden holy light smashed the void demon into pieces. It was too late for Gadon to anti-summon it. The sharp pain from the soul connection told Gadon that this void demon was finished, and its existence had been completely erased from the entire universe by the holy light. The scorching air current with the shock wave of the explosion blew Dean Gadon, who had just gotten up from the ground, several somersaults. He crossed the potholed battlefield and finally crashed into the blacksmith's shop where the undead blacksmith was working just a moment ago. Gadon's old bones were stopped by an incomparably heavy iron felt. He knocked over a red-hot iron ingot on the iron felt, and the high-temperature red iron ingot imprinted on his shoulder, making a sizzling sound that was unknown whether it was roasted meat or bones. For an undead who had been resurrected twice, physical injuries were not important. What was really tragic was the subsequent blow. The brilliant brilliance of Ashbringer broke Gadon in half at the waist. Not only in the physical sense, but also on the soul level. His soul, which was originally full and complete, was suddenly left with only half of it. Ah! Gadon let out a shrill scream. When he struggled on the ground with his bloodless upper body, two holy knights stood in front of him. Do you want to repent? A degenerate who pushed his friends and family into hell. Satan's face was full of ridicule. His Majesty the Lich King. Gadon opened his arms, trying to make one last fanatical shout with his remaining soul. Who would have thought that before he could finish, the huge Ashbringer had already chopped him into pieces like a mountain-splitting axe. The evil body finally turned into ashes and dissipated in the air. Sidon rolled her eyes. I thought you would let him finish shouting before killing him. What did Duque say again? The sad cry of a dog can be quite interesting sometimes. Ignoring Satan's frivolity, Mograine waved his hand, and a large number of holy knights rushed in to wipe out the remaining enemies in Scalomance. At this time, he turned his head to look at Sidon Dathrahan. Sidon, I have seen too many disgusting undead who escape at the last moment. That's why I won't relax until I completely destroy them. You also have to be careful. Even if it is you, if you are careless, you may end up like Antonidas and have your body taken over, ending up with a ruined reputation. Ever since the Holy Knights decided to walk on the path of holy light, they have never been afraid of death, but we must die for something. A shiver came from the soul, and it made Sidon shiver. Perhaps it was because she sensed the tragic fate in her original history, or maybe it was some strange sixth sense. This time, Sidon really listened to him. At the same time, Duque, who had conquered the Dalajan ruins, found Antonida's last gift. Chapter 856. With a hint, it was not too difficult to find. Without a hint, even 10,000 elite rangers and bandits who were good at searching would not be able to find it. Only the heavens knew why mages hid things so well. Looking at the Dalajan ruins that had been reduced to rubble, and even the average elevation of the ground had been plowed down by a few meters by Archimonde's mana, Duque felt a little uneasy. Because what Antonidas wanted him to find were 3 sewer pipes that were 200 meters east of his mage tower. They looked no different from the other sewer pipes in the Dalajan. When Duque used the incantation left behind by Antonidas and cast a small spell on his eyes, his entire vision changed. He could not help but admire the amazing thoughts and imagination of the Dalajan mages. This little method was very simple. It was to use an elemental barrier spell to construct a small lens in front of the eyes to filter out certain elements. At this moment, it was filtering out all the frost elements, 2/3 of the fire elements, and 1/4 of the arcane elements. What appeared in front of Duque were 3 large arrowheads. Obviously, the focus of the 3 arrowheads was the treasure buried deep under the Dalajan ruins. It was an underground treasure vault that was 168 meters underground and covered by a layer of rock with a magical array. First of all, this depth was already insane. Secondly, it did not matter if it was dug out by the dwarves who were good at digging holes. The treasure vault had a perfect self-destruction function. Forcefully opening the treasure vault would only result in a floor full of debris. Duque, accompanied by Elusia who had recovered as a radiant moon mage, as well as Andoin, William, and the Bronzebeard brothers, sighed deeply and used a unique spell to activate the few remaining sewer pipes. Brian found that he could see through the ground and see the water pipes that were buried underground. The pipes were so bright that he could even see the surface of the ground, and they extended all the way underground. Brian was dumbfounded. What the hell? Brother, it's a pity that Muradin is not here anymore. If he was, he would definitely nag us for at least 10 years for missing out on this. Magni knocked his hammer lightly on Bulang's head. Fool, we don't have to keep it a secret. His spirit in heaven will see it. Duque didn't dare to speak at all. Was he supposed to tell Magni, I purposely didn't tell you that your brother is still alive so that you can turn your grief into strength so that you can focus on creating Ashbringer? Duque, who was a little conflicted, decided to find a chance to confess later. All right, I'll send my doppelganger down first. Wait. Generally speaking, a Dalajan treasury like this is completely isolated from magical communication. Even if it's an avatar, how would it be able to send a message back? Duque smiled mysteriously. I have my own plan. Duke snapped his fingers, and a doppelganger that looked exactly like him appeared in front of everyone. Even its movements were vivid and lifelike. Magni's mouth gaped open. What the hell? Are all magicians this good at magic tricks? Bulang echoed, That's right, that's right. Almost at the same time, the 2 Duques spoke. Duque's doppelganger, who was walking towards the magic array that appeared, smiled. If other Breaking Dawn mages hear this, they might beat you up. The real Duque shrugged. Fortunately, you're my brother. I don't care if my magic is said to be the magic of wandering mages. The 2 dwarves' jaws dropped, and they couldn't close for a long time. Apart from the 2 dwarves, William was also shocked speechless. He turned his head and looked at Lothar with his young face. Uncle Andoin, are all Breaking Dawn mages so powerful? What should I do if I really have to fight a Breaking Dawn mage? Andoin touched the back of his head, only to realize that there were no hairlines on his forehead. He sighed awkwardly. No, regardless of whether he's a Breaking Dawn mage or not, it seems that Duque is the only one as perverted as Duque. As for fighting a Breaking Dawn mage, unless he has the skills of a pioneer warrior, there's no way he can fight now. Who knew that even Elusia was muttering softly, if Duke really had that many, we wouldn't have to fight so hard. Duque was speechless. He really didn't know if Elusia said that for him, or if she was just expressing her feelings. Antonida's magical defense array was very complete, and all types of magic were isolated. Once the doppelganger entered, not a single magic message could be sent out. Even so, Duque had a solution. After a while, a short and long knocking sound came from the depths of the earth. Of course, ordinary people wouldn't be able to sense such a weak vibration, but the system elf could. A simple Morse code would solve the problem. Short, this is S. Short, long is A. Short, long, yes is F. Short, is E. Safe? Duque said in a language that the others couldn't understand, causing them to be stunned. It was still Magni who was the most sensitive. He suddenly raised his hand and shouted, Wait, your doppelganger uses knocking to send signals? Is it Morse code? Of course, Duque answered instinctively. Magni immediately took out a loudspeaker and placed it on the ground, pressing it to his ear. He even made a shoo gesture for everyone to be quiet. His 3rd brother did the same. The two respectable dwarves huddled on the ground, listening to the weak sounds coming from the depths of the earth. It had to be said that when it came to digging underground, dwarves were first-rate experts. There's really a sound, although it's very weak. Magni was the first to shout. Heavens! Why didn't we think of this before? Metal conducts sound better than metal. In the future, we can rely on knocking on the rails to send the signals we set. The magical Bulang understood by analogy. We don't have to be exploited by those greedy human magicians anymore. Last time, that bastard said that my spies told me that my precious daughter was hanging out with a charcoal-like dwarf. He even dared to charge me 500 gold coins for this information. I only found out later that my spy didn't send such a message at all. Magni was indignant. Duque looked constipated. In fact, he really wanted to tell Magni, your precious daughter is really like a charcoal-like dark iron dwarf, and it's King true love. Now, Duque didn't dare to complicate the issue. The alliance was already annoyed enough. He didn't want another battle between the Bronzebeards and the dark iron dwarves, at least not now. Ignoring the Bronzebeards, who were ecstatic because of the sudden discovery, Duque walked into the portal with Xianxia. A halo covered both Duque and Xianxia. After a feeling of descending like an elevator, Duque saw a small room. It was a room covered in frost. In the middle of the room, in a long round icicle, a beautiful sky blue staff was sealed. Chapter 857. The white staff had a psychedelic translucent feel to it. At the top of the staff was a round blue base. On the base was a white jade-like angel with both hands clasped together in a praying posture. It looked a little like white jade, but upon closer inspection, it looked like a silver-plated metal. It was a staff that should have been frozen in an ice pillar, but behind the angel statue were 12 blue arcane stars that were distributed in the shape of a clock, rotating slowly in a clockwise direction. It was exceptionally beautiful. Duque said casually, this should be a gift left behind by Antonidas. All women love to be beautiful. Xianxia subconsciously cupped her face and exclaimed, wow! What a beautiful staff! It's a pity. This aura is only used by Breaking Dawn mages, isn't it? Duque smiled and gazed at Xianxia. I'll use it for the time being. I'll give it to you when you reach Breaking Dawn? Xianxia was stunned. Then, what are you going to use? I don't really like using staffs, unless it's a very powerful one. Otherwise, I won't bother using it. After saying that, Duque thought of something and added, actually, I still have the Tish, the legendary staff of the Guardian, from Mediv. One day, I'll recast that divine staff. Hearing Duque's words, Xianxia was relieved. Her eyes curved into two crescent moons as she smiled. It seems that even for this staff, I have to work hard to break through to Breaking Dawn. Duque rolled his eyes. Only a sorceress like Xianxia, who had no desires on the path of mystery, would be able to put the cart before the horse to such an extent of training purely for the sake of a beautiful staff. All right, it's time to get down to business. Salon. Softly chanting the spell that Antonidas had given him, Duque extended his right hand forward as if he had touched the surface of a calm lake. Magic ripples spread in the air, and when the azure radiance spread throughout the vault, the piece of ice that had sealed the staff disappeared without a trace. It was as if the ice was just an illusion. Duque let go of Xianxia's hand and stepped forward. He subconsciously reached out with his right hand, and then grabbed nothing. Like a proud kitten that refused to be touched by strangers, the blue and white staff spun in a small circle in the air, evading Duque's grasp. A cross-shaped vein appeared on Duque's forehead. This time, he reached out at an even faster speed, but missed again. This time, even Xianxia, who was watching from the side, laughed out loud. What the hell? Duque was about to flip out when he suddenly received a prompt from the system elf. Dear host, it seems to want you to hold it with your left hand. Left hand? Duque listened to the system elf's prompt and stretched out his left hand this time. Suddenly, the proud kitten turned into a docile little kitten and landed on Duque's left palm. Almost as soon as he held the staff that was more than a meter long, incomparably complex and mysterious purple-blue arcane runes covered the entire body of the staff. Duque looked at it attentively, and suddenly a large list of prompts appeared on his retina. Frowny face, Obsidian Queen, bound after pickup. Unique. Secondary staff, cannot equip another staff after equipping. 50-85 damage, speed 3. 0. Attribute, arcane level, demigod requirement, Breaking Dawn Mage, owner of Arcane Throne, and Crown of Ice, Magic Circuit. It is estimated that the attributes of the equipped user will be increased as follows. Plus 50 Endurance, plus 88 Intelligence equip, plus 20% Arcane Magic Damage equip, plus 40% Arcane Magic Conversion Efficiency equip, plus 20% Critical Strike Rating equip. Increase Magic Hit Rating by 32 equip. Increase Magic Hit Rating by 32 as long as you are in a place connected to the Arcane Elemental World. Default plus 255 Spirit. Equip, automatically activates a Magic Shield by default. Can absorb up to 550 damage. Cooldown, 60 seconds equip. You have an additional Arcane Energy. Cooldown, 300 seconds, does not conflict with the cooldown of the Arcane Circuit caused by the activation of Arcane Energy. After looking at the attributes of this strange secondary staff, Duque was dumbfounded. It was not that this staff was not impressive, but it was too impressive. Putting aside the harsh requirements that were almost exclusive to Antonidas, even though it was a demigod weapon, its attributes were even more impressive than many of the divine weapons in his impression. For example, the Itish, legendary staff of the Guardian, in Duque's impression, its intelligence was just over 100. Duque really liked staff that directly increased percentage. This was many times better than staff that increased attributes. A life-saving magic shield that could be used once every 60 seconds was definitely a praise. That extra burst was a godly skill among godly skills. If he were to praise it, then Duque would like to give it 10,000 times. But, after equipping the staff, he could no longer use other staffs? This staff could actually increase spirit by 255 in most cases? What the hell was this? Spirit was a little useless for mages, but it was better than nothing. Spirit was an attribute that was generally used by priests and other healer professions, and the plus 40% arcane magic conversion efficiency always made Duque feel, did I just take a one-type magic battery? There were so many things that Duque wanted to complain about in his heart that it was almost comparable to the stars in the sky. In the end, Duque finally understood why Antonidas did not use this staff himself. On the table where the staff was originally stored, Duque found a handwritten book. On it was written Antonidas' diary, or rather, last words. Today, I finally got my body back, but I am no longer human, but a dirty great lich. I hate this state. Although I am old, I have never wanted to survive in this form. However, I have to hypnotize myself and tell myself that if I can continue to exist, I can do more magic and explore more mysteries. Otherwise, I will not be able to fool that bastard Nazul's soul search. I am going to Kuel Salus soon, but today the Dreadlord asked me for the Book of Mediv. I guess it should be to summon a super demon from the Burning Legion, perhaps kill Jaden or Archimond. I guess it is more of the latter. Fortunately, I have a copy, which gives me a chance to tamper with it. I used a part of my own soul to replace some key bytes. If I fall, this copy will naturally be damaged. Duque, I do not know if you will see this handwritten book. If you see it, I hope you can understand how powerless pure elemental damage is against a truly powerful demon. Just like how I was defeated by the Dreadlord. You need to highly concentrate your magic, otherwise you will not be able to harm these great demons. Perhaps my path is wrong, but at least there is hope. Chapter 858. The second half of the letter described a mage profession that Duque was both familiar and unfamiliar with. Duque looked at it and exclaimed, "Damn!" Battle mage. This class-sounding profession evoked a memory that had been sealed away for a long time. Before he transmigrated, many players would remove the Azeroth. It was a time when Lordaeron had collapsed. The once glorious people of Lordaeron had formed the famous Scarlet Crusade. In the Scarlet Crusade dungeon, there was an area called the Scarlet Zone. The Scarlet Zone was not a popular dungeon and most players were not familiar with it, so it was common for the team to be wiped out. But the most terrifying elite monsters were even scarier than the bosses. They were the seemingly ordinary red-cloaked battle mages. When Duque first came, he thought it was just an ordinary monster that wielded two weapons. In its right hand was a seemingly powerful flaming sword and in its left hand was an ordinary staff. It sold swords and made staffs at the same time. Duke joked. Then he was so amusing that he, a mage, dared to run over and start the fight. Well, there was always a price to pay for underestimating someone. Duke had forgotten that the famous mage in Lord of the Rings, Mr. Gon Tofu, who was also known as the Berserker Mage, was also a dual-wielding sword-wielding staff. One could imagine that a person with such an ability was no ordinary person. These elite pharaohs' skills were quite strong. Their arcane explosion could push Duque back and attract more monsters. The shockwave from Morning dealt a lot of fire damage, and it also had a movement speed reduction effect. There was also the continuous damage spell Sacrifice. For a newbie mage like Duque who had good green equipment, he did not know that this spell could be dispelled. The result? He was defeated. Without a doubt, he was defeated. Duque used all of his skills, Flash, Ring of Frost, Icicle, and Wind Blast, but he couldn't even run back to the door and run out of the dungeon. He was brutally killed less than 10 steps away from the dungeon's door. Then, the second time, Duque did not believe it and was killed by the battle mage's staff and flaming sword. Only then did he realize how cruel this world was. Then there was no then. Step by step, the companions worked together to pull these small monsters out and torture them to death. Battle mages weren't a mainstream class in Azeroth, but they appeared repeatedly in major dungeons, torturing the players for a long time. Looking carefully, battle mage could actually have a part-time job. After thinking about it, Duque was speechless. Alright, this was the real world after all. There weren't as many rules and regulations as in the game. Just like the first generation of holy knights back in the day, they were all either priests or warriors. In fact, they didn't forget their own profession skills. In a sense, this was considered a part-time job. Duque pondered for a moment and smiled. Antonidas actually asked me to take on the role of a battle mage? What was this? Alright, this can barely be considered a path. However, now that he had a secondary weapon, what about the main weapon? Mainstream staffs were all two-handed weapons. This weird secondary staff was troublesome enough, and Duque did not have a good one-handed weapon. So, Duque casually took the only one-handed weapon he had with his right hand. It was the unknown one-handed weapon that Lothar had given him. The next moment, Duque felt that fate was playing a joke on him. Looking at the holy sword that shone with a golden light and its attributes, Duque suddenly found that he had lost the ability to roast it. Well, he didn't know where to start even if he wanted to. On the other side, he encountered a problem that he had never thought of before he came to Azeroth. Because of his weight, buoyancy, and the laws of the world, he could not use any teleportation or flying skills in Azeroth. This meant that he had to walk to the Well of Eternity. The endless ocean separated the Eastern Kingdom and the Kalimdor continent. This was not a problem for him. Demons did not need to breathe anyway, so he walked directly to the bottom of the sea from the South Stream coast. Originally, with his speed, even if he walked, he would definitely cross the endless ocean in more than a week. In theory, that was the case. However, he was tricked. 10,000 meters under the sea, he could not even see his fingers in front of him. The only thing he could rely on was his perception of the continent's magnetic field. However, an intelligent existence that had a deep-seated hatred for Archimonde cleverly used a magic tool to interfere with Archimonde's perception, causing this demon commander to foolishly run to the center of the endless ocean. One must know that the center of the ocean was not once a sea. This was the center of the ancient war 10,000 years ago, the location of the Well of Eternity. The big explosion back then had blown the continent into pieces. and the remaining super-high energy vortex had become a vortex trap that even Archimonde could not easily escape from. He was directly trapped. In the distance, a female Naga with 6 arms used a special underwater communication method to ask her leader, "My lord, aren't we indirectly helping the night elves who exiled us back then?" The Naga leader with a huge body and incomparably seductive upper body replied, "Perhaps. But those bastards from the Burning Legion, they actually dumped such disgusting pollutants into the sea. If I don't take revenge, how can I vent my anger?" Impressively, there was an ugly corrosion mark on her collarbone above her left chest. Women all loved beauty. Even if they had fallen from the beautiful high elves to the Naga with a snake lower body, they had never forgotten their natural love of beauty. Because of Du's shameless actions in the Well of the Sun, the Naga of the deep sea had fallen for it, and then Archimonde had inexplicably been implicated. Fortunately, Duque did not know. Otherwise, that bastard Duque would only have laughed 3 times. No one had thought that things would actually turn out like this, buying incomparably precious time for the creatures on the 2 continents. If Archimonde had arrived within a week, it was obvious that many things would have immediately collapsed. For example, Jaina, who had just landed in Faramore. For example, the tribal army that had arrived not much earlier than Jaina. And then there was Duque's side. 2 incomparably exquisite invitations were almost sent to Duque's hands at the same time. When Duque saw it, his eyes widened. It must be something important for Mograine to abandon the army and personally come to invite Duque. Her Majesty Queen Kalia's official ascension to the throne, please do me the honor of attending the ceremony. Next to her, also very familiar to Duque, was the youngest of the Windrunner family, Lilith. Second sister is going to be queen, remember to come. Chapter 859. One of his own was going to be a queen, and it was 2 queens ascending the throne at once. This was supposed to be a joyous occasion, worthy of celebration and celebration. However, if 2 queens who were close to him ascended the throne on the same day, then it would not be fun at all. A certain Du once had a dream, and that was to use the kingdoms that had sunk in the history of the alliance as sampans. He would make one sampan after another into a chain of ships, and then build an unsinkable aircraft carrier to ride on the sea. Now, the aircraft carrier had yet to appear, and the 2 large ships in his base were in danger of capsizing at the same time. At this moment, a certain Du thought of a certain pitiful person who was killed by his girlfriend with a hatchet. At this moment, a certain Du thought of the Alliance starting a civil war against the Elven Ranger because of him. At this moment, a certain Du thought of the Lordaeron Paladin angrily confronting the Elven Ranger. Duque's reaction was that of a dumbfounded one. At this moment, Duque, who was in the Dalajan Ruins military camp, would never know that at this moment, in the gorgeous Lordaeron Palascum Castle in the center of the holy city of Stratholme, 2 women who were about to become the most powerful on the continent were staring at each other. The room was newly cleaned, and most of the decorations in the room were from the time of Lordaeron. However, most of the furniture was very old, although it could still be seen that it had been well maintained and cleaned. The most new things in the room were the paintings hanging on the wall. Kalia, who was dressed in pure white priestly attire, used her soft fingertips to slide across the frame of a well-framed painting. Her thoughts seemed to have returned to the distant end of the river of time. I've been to many places, many of which I've only seen in night novels 13 years ago. I've always been fascinated by these places, but 13 years ago, I thought that I would never have the chance to see these places with my own eyes. I've been to Stranglethorn Vale, and was chased for 3 days and 3 nights by trolls who liked to hunt their heads. From the edge of Zul, Urub in the east, through Lake Nafaridi, all the way to the Reef Sea in the west. It was only when the murlocs by the sea covered us that we escaped. That time, Lilith alone killed 386 trolls. I've been to the Swamp of Sorrows. At that time, the swamp was still a gloomy and terrifying place. However, in order to connect Overwatch Castle and Reedridge Mountain Fortress into one, Duque carried out a large-scale development there. Riadaline and I pretended to be clerics who came to help and volunteered for half a year. I've also been to Burning Steppes, Scorching Canyon and Barren Lands. I've killed wild wolves with my own hands and killed orcs with smite. I've seen the pure white snow of Dan Maluo, walked through the mud of the wetland, and almost died in the swamp. From the earthy highlands that were almost razed to the ground after the war, to the thriving Hillsbrad Hills, to the scorched silverpine forest. After that, the four of us crossed the ocean to the west and arrived at the Kalimdor continent that most humans and elves had never been to before. We used 8 years to basically wander from the southernmost Tanaris Desert to the more northernmost Azhara and Grey Valley. 2 continents, dozens of areas. Other than the areas controlled by the High Elves and Night Elves, I've been to all the places that I could go. I've seen with my eyes that should have been imprisoned in Lordaeron's high tower. I've touched with my hands that should have only been used for court etiquette and musical instruments, as well as to serve the king's husband. I've felt with my skin that even the amount of time I spend under the sun is limited. I've truly experienced with my soul. Kalia's voice involuntarily became high-pitched. Her fingertips slid across the oil paintings that she had painted with her own hands, evoking all the memories that had made her happy, made her sad, inspired her, and made her sad in the past 13 years. When the memories of the paintings appeared in her mind again, she couldn't help but complete another spiritual journey. At this moment, Servanas, who was supposed to stay in Quell, Delos, unexpectedly appeared here. He had been sitting quietly on the guest seat in the middle of the room since the beginning, gently sipping his black tea. He put down the teacup in the most elegant manner, and in the interval between the queen-to-be Kalia, who was immersed in her memories, he finally spoke. Servanas used a sonorous and powerful voice to narrate a cruel truth that hit the nail on the head. So what? Princess Kalia. Have you ever thought about it? It might have been intentional, it might have been unintentional. The result is that you became a hidden pawn in Duque's hands for 13 years. Kalia's movements suddenly stopped, as if she had been hit by a spell that stopped time. Servanas was right. What a coincidence! That kind of coincidence was so perfect that it was hard not to think of it as a conspiracy. Just when Arthas fell into depravity and killed his father, Duque quickly rushed back and took over the most elite army in the whole of Lordaeron. Then he grandly pushed out Kalia, the golden signboard that no one could refute or oppose. Within a few days, he stabilized the situation of the collapsing Lordaeron. Come to think of it, Duque, as the deputy commander of the alliance, created the illusion that the princess of the Lordaeron alliance had died tragically. Then, when the kingdom collapsed, you quickly released the princess. If you had to attribute this to a conspiracy theory, it would be really hard to find evidence to refute it. Seeing Kalia's reaction, Servanas elegantly curled his fingers and took another sip of black tea. Then Kalia smiled. Her bright smile was completely stretched out, immediately making people think of an ocean of flowers blooming in spring. It was a smile that contained everything. A pawn? A conspiracy? Or could it be that Duque had already foreseen all of this, and then thought of how to benefit from it 13 years ago? If this is your question, then my answer is, so what? That, again. What? Kalia's magnanimous attitude made Servanas a little jealous. Kalia held her head high and chest out. She gracefully walked over with small steps and stood in front of Servanas. That year, I was still underage. At that age where women love to fantasize the most, which girl did not fantasize about their Prince Charming? If you ask me who is the Prince Charming in my heart, then from the past until now, there has only been one. At this moment, it was Servanas's turn to freeze. She remained silent and continued to listen to what Kalia seemed to be saying. If this was really a conspiracy, then Duque should have used my affection for him 13 years ago to completely possess me. When I came back to my senses, maybe I would already be the mother of several children, and each child's surname would be Marcus. By the time my evil brother killed my father, Menethel's blood had already been changed to Marcus's. Chapter 860. Kalia's voice was not loud, but each word was like a needle, stabbing into Sylvanus's chest. If Duque had not saved me back then what awaited me would have been a full 13 years of house arrest. It would have been a hopeless, gloomy life. But what did Duque give me? Freedom. From birth until now, half of my life's worth of freedom. I can do whatever I want, go wherever I want, be it mountains or seas, or swamps or jungles. My 3 companions will accompany me and do their best to ensure my safety. If this is also Duque's plot to capture my heart, then he has succeeded. I will have no regrets even if I have to sacrifice myself, or the entire Lordaeron. Freedom. What a precious word. If it were a high elf, it would easily be 1,000 years of imprisonment. For a windrunner, he would probably commit suicide in a few years. Sylvanus was extremely intelligent. Although she did not like to use her intelligence in politics and conspiracies, she had already vaguely understood why Kalia had sent a secret letter to find her and wanted to talk to her face to face. She gently put down the teacup of black tea and placed her left elbow on the armrest of the chair. Her palm rested on her cheek, and she made an elegant and relaxed posture. Well then, why do you insist on setting our Ascension Day on the same day? Are you forcing Duque to make a choice? Kalia laughed instead. Like a lover asking for favors? Or are you putting the country on a scale and forcing Duque to weigh it? How is this possible? He has never been a man who would change his decisions because of power. If that was the case, he would have become my legal husband long before that so-called Lord of Presto. Sylvanus's beautiful eyes turned. Then what do you mean? If not for Duque, both Lordaeron and Cuel Salus would have been destroyed long ago. Since we both had our hearts set on the same man, even if Duque was unable to establish the next Arajuo Empire in the future, we should at least let Duque have an alliance where he could use his talents as he pleased. I plan to let the Rotterdam Kingdom give up their position as the leader of the alliance. Even so, I hope that Duque's resolution will get a majority of votes in the alliance. Sylvanus narrowed her eyes. You mean that our 2 countries should advance and retreat together? Kalia said firmly, yes. From the military, to politics, to the economy, they advanced and retreated together in all aspects. If possible, I hope that Miss Lucia can rebuild Alterac. With the addition of the Dalajan, which is destined to be controlled by the Breaking Dawn wizard Duque, and Stormwind, which has always supported Duque, we will have at least 5 votes. Servanas rubbed his eyebrows. Kalia had formed a harem alliance. As someone who had helped Duque guard his home for 10 years, and her 4th sister had always followed Kalia, she obviously knew that Duque had been a gentleman to Kalia for 13 years. Yet it was like this. Even if Kalia was rejected by Duque emotionally, she still wanted to become Duque's hardcore supporter. This made Sylvanus a little speechless. No matter what, the 2 neighboring countries had a common enemy and common interests. In addition, their leaders were all loyal to the same man. It would be unreasonable not to unite. If they wanted to be jealous, they would have done so long ago. In any case, the 3 sisters would be by Duque's side in the future. This was an absolute advantage. After thinking about it, Sylvanus sighed helplessly and stretched out his hand. I can't think of any reason to refuse. All right, we can only let that rascal Duque take advantage of it. Kalia smiled brightly. 2 beautiful hands, 2 hands with the most power in the continent, were held together just like that. Then, let us discuss the details of the coronation ceremony. On Duque's side, a completely dumbfounded Duque was pacing back and forth. Lillis was careless and did not know the key point at all. Mograine smiled bitterly. Of course, he understood his queen's thoughts. Perhaps on a national level, even if the Rotterdam lost 2/3 of its territory, it would still be able to suppress the elves in terms of national power. In terms of relationships, Queen Kalia had not entered Duque's circle at all. He subconsciously thought that the queen was messing around and would definitely make Duque unhappy. Didn't the dignified Princess Kurtiraz's marriage break off just because Duque said so? On the other side, William secretly asked Andoin, "Uncle, this is..." Andoin rolled his eyes. "First, I'm not good at this kind of thing with women. Second, No outsider can save Duque from this kind of thing. So, let's just watch the show. William sighed along with him. In the end, Duque had no choice but to secretly ask for Elucia's opinion. However, Elucia smiled. I don't think this is necessarily a bad thing. Although Her Highness Kalia has become more opinionated after becoming an adult, they are not unreasonable people. Duque was exasperated. Then what is this? Coronation on the same day? Both of them are treating me. Do you want me to rush to the venue, or do you want me to clone myself thousands of kilometers away? No matter what I do, it will be disrespectful to the other country. Elucia let out a clear laugh. She covered her mouth and laughed without saying a word. Haha. That night, a new piece of news came, shocking Duque and the other big shots of the alliance. Queen Kalia's coronation ceremony was not in the holy city of Stratholme as everyone had imagined. Queen Sylvanas' coronation ceremony was not in the ruins of Silver Moon City. The reason why the two queens chose to coronate on the same day was that both countries had a common enemy, the Death Knight Arthas and the Scourge army. In order to rebuild the kingdom and work together in the post-alliance era, the two queens jointly decided to hold the coronation ceremony on the 25th of September at the Salis Trail on the border between the two countries. In a sense, as a big country, Rotterdam had made more concessions. Silver Moon City had become history, and the reconstruction of the new Silver Moon City was still far away, but Stratholme was still there. Moreover, the power of the two countries was disproportionate. Even though they were facing a disaster now, Rotterdam still had more than 1 million soldiers and civilians in the eastern plaguelands. And Cultivate Salis only had a little more than 100,000 elves left. But Queen Kalia was determined to do it. Unable to convince Kalia, Mograine and the others could only pinch their noses and accept it. Time flew, and the day arrived in the blink of an eye. When Duque arrived at the scene, he was a little dumbfounded. Miraculously, there were 2 coronation thrones, or rather, half of a country. This was because the southern half of the rank 9 throne had the typical Rotterdam style, luxurious and exaggerated. Although the northern half also had the gorgeous artistic style of the High Elves, because the queen was a ranger, there were many more elements of the forest. Frankly speaking, these 2 combinations looked neither fish nor fowl when looked at together. Unfortunately, all of this was not the main point. You put a chair in between the 2 queens' thrones. What are you trying to do? Duque was under a lot of pressure. Chapter 861. As the Storm Grand Duke and the commander of the Alliance, Duque was definitely qualified to attend the coronation ceremony of the 2 queens. But to sit on the seat that was side by side with the throne, this was too much. The moment he saw that seat, Duque realized that the seat that was on the same level as the throne was probably for him. Almost immediately, he decided that it was not appropriate. In the huge tent that was temporarily set up, as soon as the outsiders were chased away, Duque flew into a rage on the spot. In front of the 2 queens, Duque asked directly, "What are you doing? Who is that seat for? Don't tell me you want me to sit on it." "It's for you," Sylvanas answered without hesitation. Duque gritted his teeth. Why? When the alliance was first established, the kings made a declaration that no commander's position could be higher than the king's. The commander is just a coordinator, not a ruler. Sylvanas threw out an answer that Duque had never thought of. Because you inherited the will of Alonsis Fail. But I'm a mage. Duque looked constipated. I asked Riadaline. When you and I attack together, the golden soul coin that you made should be condensed from the will of the former Archbishop of Holy Light. Am I right? Duque was speechless. At the side, Kalia began to sing. Why did the Calamity army invade so quickly? Why did Lordaeron and Cultivate Salis collapse so easily? Why did the Church of the Cursed easily infiltrate the upper echelons of the 2 kingdoms? The former prince of Lordaeron has fallen. Sylvanas continued, the king of Cultivate Salis has also fallen. And Darkin and the other members of the Silver Moon Council. Kalia continued, doesn't this show how much harm the lack of faith has caused to the world? So, after our discussion, the upper echelons of the two kingdoms unanimously decided that from the day we ascend the throne, to fight against evil and to purify ourselves, the two kingdoms will worship the Church of the Holy Light as the national religion. We will vigorously promote the training of priests and paladins. Servanas continued, at the same time, the elites of our two countries will be under your command to deal with the upcoming Archaran crusade. They made so much sense that Duque had nothing to say. If they wanted to push Duque out from a personal point of view, Duque would not agree no matter what. The problem was that Duque had indeed inherited Alonsis' moral integrity. There was no way to deny it. After all, Duque had been the last person to see the Archbishop of the Church of the Archbishop. At that time, all the clergies in Stratholme saw the Archbishop give Duke a Holy Light inheritance. Of course, the position of Archbishop of the Holy Light was passed on to Uther. The problem was that the Church of Holy Light pursued selflessness and dedication too much, which actually conflicted with the interests of the nobles. Even though Uther was the Archbishop of the Church of the Holy Light, when Uther and Arthas clashed, Tyrrhenus, who was determined to have more royal power than divine power, demoted Uther. Even though Uther also held the position of Archbishop of the Holy Light, when Uther and Arthas had a conflict, Tyrrhenus, who was determined to have more royal power than divine power, immediately demoted Uther. Now, there were many people who had the Holy Knight's legacy, but they were all fighting. There was no one who could truly represent the will of the Holy Light. Now, there were many people who had the Holy Knight's legacy, but all of them were fighters. There was no one who could truly represent the will of the Holy Light. It was not impossible to bring up Duque from this angle. Kalia added fuel to the fire. Duque, just agree. Now that there is a craze for revenge in both kingdoms, I feel that there is a need to properly guide this hatred. Mograine, Abendis, and Dathrahan all believe that you, who have the true legacy of Archbishop Fail, can indeed represent the will of the Holy Light. At this time, Ilucia, who had been following behind Duque silently, said to Duque, Turayan and Windsor have also agreed. Sylvanus narrowed her eyes. Riadaline, who is about to form the Holy Knights in our kingdom, also thinks that you are very suitable. Duque suddenly realized that he had been sold out by his women. If he did not stand up, he might really let the historical Scarlet Crusade rise again. Since ancient times, countless history had proven that fanatics were not destined to have a good ending. It was precisely because of their extreme nature that extremists would never receive the support of the masses. Since he had already saved Mograine and Abendis, he would not be able to forgive himself if he allowed them to go back to their old ways. Duque scratched his head. All right, you've convinced me. Although in a way that I hate. In the big tent, the three women showed expressions of joy at the same time. Ilucia said with a smile, Are you done with your official business? Now that the official business was done, it was time for private matters. Suddenly, the two queens, who had been so majestic just a moment ago, flinched a little at the same time. Of course, Queen Kalia's reaction was slightly bigger. Knowing that she could not avoid it, Kalia stepped forward and bowed deeply. I'm sorry. This time, I was the one who suggested this first. Servanas indifferently interjected, but I agreed. Agreeing meant that she was an accomplice. Queen Sylvanus was quite loyal. Duque put his hands on his hips. I don't understand. What are you trying to achieve by doing this? Kalia raised her head. I just want to tell you and the world that the two of us and the kingdom behind us will support you unconditionally. Have you considered the reaction of the other kingdoms? What do you want Magni to think? What do you want Daelin to think? What do you want Varian to think? No, I think they will value your voice more. Now that the demon commander of the Burning Legion has arrived, according to Mediva's prophecy, there will be more crises of world destruction coming to Azeroth. What we need is a more united alliance, a single, correct voice. Of course, Duque knew that his actions in the future were correct. After all, the general trend was still going in that direction. He was also sure that most of his opinions were correct. But at this point, was the alliance still the alliance? Duque could not help but feel puzzled. Ilucia spoke. Duque, you have not been here for the past 10 years. That's why you don't know how serious the internal strife within the alliance has been. If it wasn't for the Stormwind Kingdom and the Iron Furnace Fort holding the fort, the alliance would have withdrawn the army from the watchtower and cancelled the surveillance of the Burning Steppes and Scorching Canyon. Bastard! You're asking for it. Duque could not suppress his anger. Servanas blinked. That's why we're doing this, to give you more authority. Chapter 862. A fly would not bite a seamless egg. It was precisely because Sargeras paid a huge price and did not hesitate to lurk for hundreds of years to control Medivh. He opened a hole in the Azeroth protection circle that was originally tightly guarded, which led to a series of subsequent problems. In fact, Duque also realized that it was precisely because of the fall of the dragon aspect that led to the weakening of the planet's protection circle. Even if the Deathwing, Nisario, continued to live as a traitor, it might be better than killing him in advance. However, what made Duque regret and fear was not this, but the various uncertainties in the alliance. Different races, different kingdoms, and different demands. This difference was all around. In the alliance, one could seek common ground while reserving differences and pursue greater goals. Duque believed that when he was around, he was absolutely sure that he could control the itch and pain points of each country, and stimulate or urge each country to make the right choice with a common goal. After transmigrating here for so long, Duque discovered a fact. Even if he had climbed to his current high position, he still could not completely prevent every tragedy. Especially when he was not in Azeroth, fate seemed to continue to move in the predetermined direction. Kalia and Queen Syriana teamed up to play a little trick, which made Duque a little unhappy. On the other hand, they also reminded Duque that he needed to cultivate more agents in the alliance who would firmly support him, so that in case he was not around, they could also stabilize the situation in the alliance. Duque, who was clear about the original history, knew very well that in the following years, the various kingdoms could be said to be in constant trouble. From another perspective, Duque was a little worried that things would go too far. Kalia's unprincipled support for him might cause dissatisfaction among the other kings of the alliance. This balance needed to be better grasped. Rubbing his eyebrows, Duque looked up at Kalia. The once extremely gentle princess had become mature, be it in temperament or mind. He still remembered that when they parted 10 years ago, Kalia was still an innocent and pure girl. Now that she had seen more, she naturally had her own opinions. Duque could not help but sigh. Unexpectedly, it was this sigh that caused Kalia's uneasy face to instantly turn pale. She gently clenched her skirt and lowered her head. Duque, do you not like what I'm doing? I just want to prove to you that I, too, can be like Eluhia, a person who supports you from behind. If you hate me being involved in politics and power, I can give up all of this immediately. I don't care even if I have to be a puppet to pass on orders, because Duque looked at Kalia with a gentle gaze, just like when he had rescued Kalia from the cage in the palace 13 years ago. He had watched Kalia dance barefoot in the snow-covered fields. It was pure admiration without any distracting thoughts. However, Duque wasn't looking at Kalia's beautiful appearance. Instead, he was looking at her eyes, voice, expression, body language, and all sorts of other things, hoping to see through her heart. Then, he truly felt the pure and kind girl who did not forget her original heart. She had nothing else to ask for, but wholeheartedly wanted to repay the freedom he had given her back then, gently stroking Kalia's head and letting her soft golden hair flow through his fingers, Duque revealed a faint smile. There's no need to deliberately distort your heart for someone. Living for others is a very tiring thing. I'm very grateful for your support, but I've always been doing things that are beneficial to the entire alliance and even the entire world. I think that any wise leader can see whether what I'm doing is right or not. Everyone can make mistakes, and there's no need to deify me. As long as you can scrupulously abide by your original heart and do your best to work for the development of the alliance, it's fine. Scrupulously abide by his original heart. For simple words sublimated Duque's entire state of mind. Kalia suddenly realized Duque's true thoughts. From the start, Duque had never thought of using Kalia or Cervantes to achieve any specific goals for himself. It should be said that as long as they ascended to the throne, it was more than enough for him. At this time, those with a little information network knew that the three Windrunner sisters had long been taken care of by Duque. Kalia had also been with Duque for more than 10 years. Who didn't know that those two families would be hardcore supporters of Duque? If they made too big of a move as soon as they ascended the throne, it would instead agitate the other kings, who would worry that their own kingdoms would be peacefully evolved by Duque. After all, for the aristocratic forces that were used to playing political games, it was not uncommon for them to spend more than 100 years annexing other forces and developing their own families. Understanding all of this, Kalia felt a little ashamed. She was ashamed of her own political immaturity. She nodded. I understand. I will do my best to revive the Rotterdam Kingdom and make the alliance stronger at the same time for the fundamental interests of the people of the Rotterdam Kingdom. After getting Duque's approval, Kalia nodded and bowed gracefully. She then glanced at Ilusia and Cervantes reluctantly, and left first. Then, Ilusia tactfully glanced at Duque, who was a little embarrassed, and the thought-provoking Queen Sylvanas. She smiled. I'll go out first too. You guys haven't seen each other for so long, you should have a good chat. Finally, only Duque and Queen Sylvanas were left in the huge tent. Cervantes, on the other hand, was straightforward. He walked up to Duque without any shyness, and put his two muscular arms on Duque's shoulders. His 10 strong yet soft fingers hugged Duque's neck from the back of Duque's neck. Today, Queen Sylvanas was still dressed as a ranger. Unfortunately, it was unknown whether it was because of the ritual or something else, but her skin that was usually exposed to the air was covered by a layer of black gauze. Although it was more alluring after being hugged, it lacked the feeling of skin against skin. Duque asked, with your intelligence, there's no reason you can't figure out that Kalia is a little silly doing this. Queen Sylvanas rolled her eyes. It's okay. I think a girl who gives her heart and soul to you is also very beautiful like this. I may be able to stop you from continuing to give your heart to the world, but I can't stop more women from falling in love with you. Who told me to fall for such an outstanding man? Duque was a little breathless, because when Queen Sylvanas pretended to fix Duque's collar, she tightened her grip on Duque. Dear Duque, although I don't mind sharing you with other women, because I'm a latecomer myself, it doesn't mean that I'll tolerate your promiscuity indefinitely. I'll forget about the mess you left behind in the past, but in the future, don't give girls magic ice roses or whatnot. Not one girl in this world can resist this kind of romance. Chapter 863. For a moment, Duque froze. Words like capsize kept popping up in his head. However, Queen Sylvanas' attitude made Duque feel a little complicated. There was no such thing as absolute perfection in love. Sometimes one could be an angel one moment, and the next, a devil. There were things that one liked and things that one disliked. Being willing to tolerate everything about the other was love. If Queen Sylvanas was just a docile vase, Duque could have as many beauties as she wanted in the noble circles of various countries with just a wave of his hand. Queen Sylvanas, on the other hand, was strong, wild, and constantly fighting against fate. She was definitely the ideal partner to accompany Duque to the end in Azeroth. Duque smiled brightly. Just as he tried to put his hands on Queen Sylvanas' flexible and elastic waist, Queen Sylvanas dodged beautifully, and Duque missed. When Duque came back to his senses, he only saw Queen Sylvanas' slender figure standing at the entrance of the tent. Queen Sylvie turned her head and gave him a provocative look. You bastard, your body reeks of Ilusia. Before I calm down, go find your Ilusia. Duque was dumbfounded. When the beauty disappeared in front of him, he sighed sadly. Damn it, are all the women of the Windrunner family dogs? Queen Sylvanas' words were not only for Duque, but also for Ilusia, who was waiting at the door. The uncrowned queen of the South Sea city-state, the Marquis of Stormwind, blushed with shame. No matter what, at least this matter was settled. In fact, The coronation ceremony was more like a political show. The two queens first held the coronation ceremony at the border, and then the official ceremony was held in their respective main cities. Of course, Rotterdam was the holy city of Stratholme. After tomorrow, the country would officially be renamed the Kingdom of Sin-Dorii, and the coronation ceremony would be held on the plains to the east of the ruins of the old Silvery Moon City. Just like in the original history, the elves decided to rebuild a new Silvery Moon City here. This was by no means an easy task. The plague had not been completely eradicated, and most of the crops had been destroyed. Sin-Dorii, who was unable to feed all of the elves, could only use boats to transport the surviving elves to Windrunner's territory in the southern continent's elven forest. Windrunner's territory, which had been viewed as a traitor by most of the elves in the past, had now become a refuge that could save their lives. This was quite ironic. On the other hand, it showed the importance of working with the Alliance. Without the help of the Alliance, this batch of elves might not even survive. It would be ridiculous if they did not die in the invasion of natural disasters, but died in the famine and plague that followed. Just like that, on the 25th of September in the Dark Portal, the two formerly top-tier northern kingdoms had their empresses enthroned on the same morning, proclaiming the new birth of their kingdoms. The Salus Trail was not a spacious place. However, the huge platform built halfway up the mountain could easily accommodate 5,000 Scarlet Cross warriors and 5,000 elven guards. Similarly, the 5,000 citizens who had been selected from various places were fortunate enough to witness the ceremony, witnessing the kingdom's new hope in their hearts. Queen Kalia Menethil and Queen Sylvanas Windrunner step onto the red carpet. In the south, Queen Kalia was different from everyone's impression. She was not wearing her usual light princess dress. Instead, she was wearing a pure white, gold-rimmed commandment priest robe that was incomparably solemn. She looked solemn, holding the holy book of the Church of Holy Light in her left hand, and the scepter that symbolized Lord Darren's authority in her right. Her soft blonde hair was tied up behind her head as she slowly walked forward. In the north, Queen Sylvanas's clothes had also changed the impression that the elves had of her as an elven ranger in the past. Today, the first thing that caught their eyes was her fiery red cloak. Then, there were 3 layers of red pauldrons with golden edges stacked on top of each other like a sandwich. On the edge of each layer was a row of long, fierce, and lifelike fangs, the fangs that had once been pulled out of the mouths of trolls. Her entire upper body, apart from the pauldrons and the cloak, only had the breastplate that looked like a chest. In the middle of the breastplate, there was a huge golden gem that seemed to be twisting with electricity. It was dazzling. Her lower body was a pair of tight red breeches, matched with a set of leg guards that were also fiery red. If one looked closely, they would find that the leg guards had a large number of elven magic inscriptions that strengthened speed and agility. Coupled with the large bow slung across her back and the quiver filled with sharp arrows that never left her body, she was the complete opposite of Queen Kalia's style. One martial art. However, they also slowly moved forward under the gazes of the honor guards lined up neatly along the red carpet, surrounded by a formation of swords and spears not far away. Sylvanas's steps were obviously bigger, but because of her slower pace, the two queens reached the bottom of the throne steps at the same time. Separated by the clearly marked border under their feet, the two queens stood across the border. Sylvanas smiled. Together. Kalia nodded. Of course. At the same time, Mograine and Riadaline, who stood at the bottom of the steps on the left and right, shouted at the same time, "Hail to Her Majesty the Queen!" The next moment, the holy knights standing on both sides of the red carpet gathered holy light in their bodies at the same time. Clusters of holy light rose like curtains, wrapping the figures of the two queens in it. Under the watchful eyes of the crowd, they walked up the highest step at the same speed, step by step, step by step. Waiting for them there was Duque in his blue and white formal attire. Before this moment, many people did not know why the young-looking Duque was standing in this sacred position. They were even more indignant that the two queens walked to the highest step and knelt on one knee to Duque. "Why should our queen kneel to you, the commander of the alliance?" until the huckster Duque spread out his right palm, letting a dazzling illusory gold coin, like a small sun, float in the air. Duque's voice echoed throughout the venue. A long time ago in the Dalajan, a Lordaeran missionary threw a copper coin into the fountain pool and made a wish. I hope that one day I can spread the way of the holy light to the civilians and teach them the meaning of the three virtues. Then, throughout his life, he saved countless civilians, and in the battle of the dark portal that almost caused the extinction of the humans and the high elves, he created a brand new profession, the Holy Knight. Until today, the Holy Knights are still in the hands of the evil undead calamity, protecting every kind being with holy light. Duke paused for a moment, then said the name in an emotional tone. This great missionary of Lordaeran is the former Archbishop of the Holy Light, His Excellency Alonso's Fail. Chapter 864. Not every clergyman's name would be holy in the hearts of the people. Perhaps Duque was more famous in many fields, but in terms of devotion to the holy light, compassion, salvation of the soul, and saving countless lives, Duque was no match for Alonso's Fail. Almost as soon as Duque mentioned the name, nearly 10,000 people of the Rotterdam Kingdom, apart from the guards who had a mission, all started to kneel. Duque continued, without Archbishop Fail's teachings, perhaps countless people in the world would still be on the verge of depravity and corruption, allowing evil to take advantage of them, allowing greed and sin to dominate the souls of the people. Without Archbishop Fail's holy light, we wouldn't even be able to find weapons to fight against the Calamity army. When Duque said that, the elves could not help but recall the scene when Duque and Queen Sylvanas worked together to defeat the evil illusion of the Lich King. They also thought of their loved ones who had their souls imprisoned and their corpses desecrated after being slaughtered by the Calamity army. They thought of the holy light that destroyed evil, and suddenly felt a heartfelt admiration for the name Alonso's Fail, which was once unfamiliar to them. Unknowingly, even the elves started to kneel. At this moment, the golden light from the soul coin had already extended to Duque's entire body. From afar, Duque looked like a huge golden torch. Duque's eyes were smiling and he said loudly, "I am not a priest. I am not qualified to bestow the holy light with the name of a clergyman. However, as the inheritor of the holy light of the former archbishop, I am still willing to give the highest blessing to the two majesties who hope to guide the people with the path of holy light. Bless you, Your Majesty Menethil. Bless you, Your Majesty Windrun." In the next moment, dazzling golden light extended from Duke's left and right hands, and even the bodies of the two queens who had stretched out their hands flickered with golden light. 3 seconds later, 2 beams of golden light shot into the sky, straight into the clouds. Their bodies were bathed in the holy light. The 2 queens smiled at Duque before looking at each other. They took out a crown from the holy box that they had long opened and put it on themselves. Monarchical power was not bestowed by God, nor was it bestowed by heaven. Instead, it was bestowed by the will of the people. Looking at the golden lily crown on Queen Kalia's head, then looking at the thorny flower crown on Sylvanas's head that symbolized revenge, both humans and elves raised their heads, waiting for their queen's declaration. The 2 queens stood up at the same time. Kalia was the first to raise the holy book in her hand, and her gentle but firm voice resounded in all directions. "I, Kalia Menethil, will purify the land of Lordaeran that has been polluted by the plague, and return everyone a fertile and green world." In the next second, Kalia put away the holy book and raised her scepter. "Also, I swear that for the rest of my life, I will punish the traitor who killed the late King Tyrrhenus, my brother Arthas, with the holy light, and let his soul repent for 10,000 years in hell." Almost at the same time, Sylvanas also made her declaration in the Elven language. Because she used the language of the wind, it was very miraculous that even though she and Kalia's declarations were said at the same time, their voices did not affect each other at all. Instead, they were very clear and directly floated into the ears of every elf. Sylvanas stood on a high ground and raised her bow high up in the air. "I, Sylvanas Windrunner, will rebuild the great elven kingdom. Not only will I clear every plague in the kingdom, but I will also rebuild Silvery Moon City. I declare that I will also lead the Sin Dorii, who are seeking revenge for their fallen compatriots, to exact the cruelest revenge on Dark and Delithil and the other former members of the Silver Moon Council who betrayed their people, as well as the former Sun King Anastrian Sunstrider, as well as the Death Knight Arthas and the Lich King Nizul who personally destroyed Quell, Delas. Only by letting the souls of the traitors burn in the flames of hell for billions of years. Only by letting the great Sin Dorii once again stand at the top of the world's races. Only then will our revival be complete. The same stirring speech, the same unwavering oath. The two queens' declarations completely ignited the passion in the hearts of the people, stirring up the desire in their hearts for the revival of their race and kingdom. After a short pause of half a second, the entire mountaintop erupted into wild cheers that shook the earth and mountains at the same time. Long live Her Majesty Kalia. Long live Her Majesty Sylvanas. For the rise of Lord Darren once again. For the true rebirth of Sin Dorii, whose tears were flying? Whose soul was it that was screaming? Two races that had both experienced countless hardships and the threat of death, at this moment, crossed the boundaries of their borders, crossed the boundaries of their races, and let out the same cheer for the same goal. Because they had been suppressed for so long, they had once felt despair. Because they had once been lost, and could not find a way out. So when the new queen became a flag with both material and spiritual significance, standing in the center of their vision, they completely fell into a frenzy. Mograine and Abendis wiped away their tears. They had found a person who could continue their loyalty. Lilith wiped away her tears. After being oppressed for so long, the Windrunner finally did not have to be bullied for no reason by the stubborn mages. Redun, Thor, Themar, and Hadgeron were all wiping away their tears. They finally saw hope for the kingdom to rise again. Perhaps the two kingdoms were still very weak now, but with the cooperation of the Alliance, as long as the evil demon leader Archimonde was eliminated, and in time, the kingdom that had once almost fallen to the point of extinction would definitely rise again. Among the guests, the former elven Prince Kale, that was also impressively among them. There was no jealousy, no hatred. Kale, that's also wiped away his tears lightly and clapped his hands vigorously. Solarian, Caponia, do you see that? In the face of difficulties, I see pessimism and despair. However, Sylvanas only has the spirit of never giving up, and the direction and method to solve the difficulties. I am not as good as her. I believe that she is the true queen who can lead the elves out of despair and hardship, not me. Although the two beautiful astrologers agreed with what Kale, that said from the bottom of their hearts, their mouths were filled with bitterness. Of course, not every being would give the best wishes for the two queens' ascension. For example, the Sun King, who was in the secret chamber under the ruins of Lordaeron, was venting his anger crazily. The dark flames burned any living being that could move. Even the former members of the Silver Moon Council who were loyal to him, and the current high-level liches, kept a respectful distance from him. Traitor. Despicable thief. Sylvanas, do you think you can steal my power and status like this? Do you think you have become a true king just because you proclaimed yourself king? No, I'm not done with you. And Kale, that's, you useless piece of trash, you actually watched as your father's power was stolen? You don't deserve to be my son. Chapter 865. Thousands of kilometers away, Kale, that seemed to sense something and suddenly felt a chill. Carponia asked in concern, "What's wrong?" "Nothing. I was just thinking that my father might be very unhappy to see this." Kale, that smiled bitterly. Although he wanted to leave this place as soon as possible and escape from this political whirlpool, sometimes, he couldn't do it even if he wanted to. Duque also wanted to help him escape, but unfortunately, Lor, Themar and the other higher-ups insisted that the official exit of the former king's representative would make Sylvanas' ascension more legitimate. This would certainly embarrass Kale, that's But the former prince accepted everything calmly. This made Kale, that's supporters, indignant. Looking at the two queens sitting on their thrones on the stage, and Duque sitting between them like stars surrounding the moon, Solarian and the other elven experts felt an indescribable jealousy. Alexandros Mograine and Lor Themar Theron took the stage respectively and read out the policies that the new king would implement after ascending to the throne on behalf of their queens, receiving cheers from the people again and again. The more this happened, the more uncomfortable Kale, that's supporters, felt. The resentment in their hearts was stuck in their chests, and they couldn't vent it. Even Solarian, who was used to seeing the world and felt that she could bear all this mentally, forced herself to come to the venue, felt like she was going crazy. She was extremely glad that the two irascible fellows, Solidre and Segunar, weren't here. Suddenly, an unexpected person approached Kale. He was wearing a hood, but it didn't cover his face. In the cheering crowd, he seemed so out of place. Duque. Unexpectedly, as soon as Duke left the rostrum, the other side came over. Kale, was first stunned, then pleasantly surprised. On such an occasion, it undoubtedly represented a rare and valuable support. There's no need to get up. We'll just sit and talk. Duque smiled. Despite their dissatisfaction, Solarian and Carponia immediately stood up and gave up a chair for Duque. Duke took the responsibility and sat on Kale, right-hand side, allowing the two radiant moon astromancer beauties to serve on his side. Sitting down, Duque spoke again. The feeling of losing glory must be terrible, right? Duque was so straightforward that Carponia almost exploded, but Solarian, who was more composed, held her down. Kale, didn't suppress his emotions and allowed the pain to appear on his handsome face. Yes, I used to think that I could bear all of this, but I realized that my temperament wasn't strong enough to bear such a heavy blow. I'm okay, but I'm afraid my followers will be a little unstable. I won't say any more useless words of encouragement. I just want to say that all intelligent beings in this world will have a battle with Archerans, the commander of the Burning Legion. Duque's words made Kale, suddenly agitated. He gripped the armrest of the chair tightly and turned half of his body around. Do you mean, Duque lowered his voice and said in an extremely solemn tone, if that day comes, will you join? When the time comes, I will go, Servanas will go, and Mograine will go. But let me say this first. That's Archerans with at least half of his strength. I can't guarantee that anyone, including me, will come back alive. It wasn't just Kale, Even the two beautiful astromancers behind him were so excited that they couldn't stop trembling. All the depression from before and the resentment that was heavy like a mountain had vanished without a trace at this moment. Other than Duque, no one had ever been willing to truly understand the feelings of a group of traitors like them. They still loved their motherland from the bottom of their hearts, longed to save their compatriots from suffering, and were eager to wash away their shame and prove themselves to the world with glory. But there was no chance. They originally thought that going to the door of darkness would be equivalent to being exiled for a few years. At most, they would suffer a few years of disdain, and their situation would be better when they came back. But now, Duque had given them a better shortcut. How could they not be ecstatic? For traitors like them, this was no longer the biggest concern. In the end, it was the more cautious Solarian who bowed deeply to Duque and added, I have a question. Before I ask, please forgive my narrow-mindedness, Your Excellency Marcus. I don't mind. Duque waved his hand. Solarian uncontrollably rubbed her skirt along her thighs. If Your Highness Kale, joins us in the expedition against the Archerans, will we have an official identity? Solarian? Was a little shocked and angry. He didn't expect his follower to ask such a question. In his imagination, he could be a hired thug. If he was lucky enough to come back alive, and Duque could be merciful and wash away the shame with him, then he would be endlessly grateful. Wasn't Solarian's question a disguised form of blackmail? Duque smiled. I've always been like this. If others treat me with sincerity, I will treat them with sincerity. The expedition against a peerless expert like the Archerons is a matter of life and death to begin with. Every member who dares to join the expedition should be respected by the world. Therefore, as long as you join, it must be as an official. And at the expedition ceremony, Kale, you will be among the Alliance's generals. This is my promise. Hiss. The three elves all gasped. They didn't know how to describe their feelings at all. The fall of Kuel Salis and the destruction of Silvermoon City could not be attributed to Duque. Kale, had knelt down out of kinship, so it was hard for him to blame Duque for not coming out earlier. Duque had explained later that he was unable to gain control of the Sunwell branch, and that Duque did not have the capital to fight against the Sun King. After all, there were all kinds of strange things to be blamed. The Sun King could only blame himself for ruthlessly refusing to join the Alliance at the beginning, chasing away the Alliance ambassador, Bolvar, and bowing down to evil in order to continue his existence. But now, Duque had so generously opened the door and given them a chance to redeem themselves. One had to know that for the smooth political transition, as someone close to Servanas, Duque should have nailed Kale, to the pillar of shame instead of trying to whitewash Kale, Unable to suppress the excitement in her heart, Solarian actually knelt down on one knee and spoke in the Elven language. The general meaning of these words was that she had gauged the heart of a gentleman with her own mean measure, which was a serious insult to Duque's character. In order to protect Duque's reputation as long as Kale, could restore his reputation this time, she was willing to work like a slave for Duque. At this moment, Duque was dumbfounded. Chapter 866. If it was in the future where ancient gods were everywhere and demigods were as common as dogs, a radiant moon astromancer might just be a rare elite. However, in this era where the third battle of the Dark Portal had yet to end, it was a little too much to ask a radiant moon astromancer to work for him. Duque instinctively wanted to refuse, but the system notification told him that this was a matter of faction prestige selection. Faction prestige selection was when two opposing forces were fighting. Which one would you choose? Once you chose one side, don't expect the other side to treat you well. The higher your reputation on one side, the more the other side would want to tear you to pieces. Miraculously, when Duque went to find out what the other side was, the system elf told Duque that it was unknown. What a mess! This was the first time Duque had heard of such opposing factions. However, since he had decided to help Kaisi, there was no reason for him to give up halfway. After all, Solarian was a famous boss in the Eye Fortress in the future. At the very least, she had much more room for growth than Elucia. Moreover, when Duque saw Solarian's nervous and uneasy eyes, and thought of the customs of the elves, Duque more or less understood what was going on. Mystics were particular about equivalent exchange. In the Dalajan, exchange was usually in the form of selling one's body to serve the Dalajan for a long period of time. Mage apprentices of low birth would mostly sell their labor and join the Dalajan Mage Guild in order to pay their tuition fees. In the High Elf Society, which was more particular about bloodlines and family inheritance, the price of teaching magic, even if it was just taking them in as a mage apprentice, was usually a lifetime of loyalty to a certain family. Becoming an elf of a certain bloodline meant that one would be marked for life. This was also why the loyal followers of the prince had never thought of changing sides. Duque had originally thought that Sylvanas would become the queen and replace Kaisi, who had been the king for a while in history. Duque had decided to help Kaisi out of a desire to make up for it. Who would have thought that the elves' way of thinking was even more rigid? Solarian wanted to use her status as a radiant moon to help Kale, who was also a radiant moon, have a bright future. Based on the difference in strength, it was the followers who thought they had the advantage. Duque was a little speechless. That's not good. If this gets out, they'll think that I stole your follower with my power. Unexpectedly, Kale, dropped an even bigger bomb. He also left his seat and bowed deeply to Duque with Caponia. No, actually, Solarian's intention is also my intention. As sinners who betrayed their own people, If they could slightly redeem their reputation and reduce the guilt in their hearts, that would be the greatest redemption for them. If we're lucky enough to survive after fighting the Archerons, I hope you can have me and these elites who have lost their homeland follow you. Duque almost spat out a mouthful of blood. *CK. Is this even worse than a chicken on the ground? Although I also know that in history, you were betrayed by your loved ones, forced into madness and despair, and even nailed to the pillar of shame with your subordinates, but you, a dignified former prince, becoming my subordinate like this? It's not good. Speaking of which, if I bring you out, of course it'll be cool. Agtitui. Duque was very embarrassed. But at this time, it wasn't just Kale and his servants who bowed to him. Even the few high elves in the VIP seats bowed to Duque. These old elves weren't strong, but they represented several ancient families. They also helped to plead with Duque. Kale, that's made a big mistake, but considering that he did it out of kinship, we can still understand. It would be a pity if a kind and responsible genius like him died in disgrace. Since Sir Marcus has this idea, after Kale, that proves himself, you might as well accept them as followers. Under everyone's persuasion, Duque could only reluctantly say that everything would have to wait until after the sniping of Archimonde. Duque was waiting for news from the other side of the endless sea. Not only did he have to wait for news from Ronan, but he also had to wait for news from Jaina and even from the orcs. Everything needed time to ferment, and it couldn't be rushed. In the following days, because he knew that the Scourge army was no longer led by the Lich King and Arthas, Duque was at ease and let the Alliance organize a few large-scale attacks. Unfortunately, it wasn't complete. Because the entire Silverpine forest was filled with endless werewolves, they didn't dare to rashly attack the Alterac Mountains, and they couldn't deal with the zombies at the bottom of Lordamere Lake. The southern front was almost at a standstill. But with Lothar's Griffin Legion, Old General Haas's Mountain Eagle Knights, and Bulang Bronzebeard's Mechanized Dwarven Legion, a total of 150,000 soldiers, the defense was stable. Duque gathered his army in the eastern Plaguelands and took advantage of the last opportunity before winter to launch a fierce attack on the western Plaguelands. This was a grand attack that gathered all the elite troops that Duque could muster, Mograine and Abendis's Scarlet Cross Legion, which had 150,000 soldiers after expansion, Saidan Dathrahan's 60,000 Stratholme troops, Turayan's 50,000 Dark Portal troops, Windsor's 40,000 private corps of the Marcus family, Magni's mechanized tank army with more than 3,000 Dwarven steam tanks, as well as 5,000 cannons of various sizes, and a total force of 80,000 dwarves and gnomes, Cudrin Wildhammer's 4,000 Griffin Knights, Servanaz's 20,000 rangers and mages mixed army. Duque personally led more than 10,000 mages and more than 30,000 Dalajan infantry mages. In addition to the militias organized by the people of Lordamere, the total force was 800,000, and they pressed against the Scourge army. Throughout the month of October, the Dreadlords sent nearly 10 million undead creatures into the western Plaguelands, which was surrounded by mountains. From the newly invented abominations that were more than 3 meters tall and were stitched together by many rotten corpses, to the zombie dogs that were resurrected from some unknown ravine, from the sky to the ground, they fought with the Alliance in almost every inch of the western Plaguelands. But with Duque's endless targeted tactics and the Alliance's gradual advance, the western Plaguelands were finally recovered by the Alliance on the 30th of October. From the northernmost Hearth Valley to the southernmost Coldwind Camp, from the westernmost Undead Barrier to the easternmost Soderil River, all the Scourge undead were swept away. If it wasn't for the Dreadlords forcing Anastrian, Kel, Thuzad and Arthas to defend the newly built Undead Barrier, the Alliance might have been able to enter the Tirisful Glades and take down Lordamere. You're tuning in to the Wang Lin's Journey YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories,